Chapter 41, Purple Hills, maybe 12. Act 2, Glitch, Suda POV. They say amongst Queen Lunara's hateful 8 offspring, it was he, the whose name was adorned in golden, who she doted upon the most, and I tell you this, despite the humility and acts of love that graced his shadows, it was he, his kin all feared the most, Ujin the Forgotten One. Dear mortal, does one believe that the grace bestowed upon thee is one of grateful charity? For even those touched by the perfect dawn had burdened an original sin. Kukuku, I bid you good luck. That voice, Suda had heard it whispering dark curses into his ears before. Only one shadowy figure loomed over him. It's him, the fishbowl head, Helvetios? There was a stir in the heavens, and Suda saw a gathering of pale clouds painted across an expanse with a strange, dullish gray firmament. If he had to describe it, the word gloom appeared to him as he wondered how a world filled with a swirl of colors streaking across like countless veins could look like an expanse. Then Suda saw the stars, but unlike how he ever remembered seeing them before, the stars were falling away like comets, one by one. Suda felt incredibly strange. He knew he was lying down, but he was formless. His body was neither here nor there, and it filled him with a slight hazy feeling. It was hard to pinpoint things right now. Only one truth remained certain. He wasn't dead, most definitely alive in fact, but he felt stuck somewhere. Unable to understand where he was, Suda did the most logical thing at that moment. He closed his eyes and waited. He waited in silence, with patience and expectancy. Something would change. He knew that from experience. The night of Starfall, his subsequent encounter with Puh, and then his sudden end with the fishbowl head, and that dark oath he was forced to swear upon. Nothing was ever by chance. By now we both understand that, don't we, Rado Suda? These mysteries between us, they all serve purpose. Suda wasn't feeling that usual overwhelming presence he felt before. That pang of coldness crawling down his spine was no more than a slight arousal of pain at this moment. Slowly, he began to find a steadiness within his heart. He was at least glad he had his thoughts. If he had lost control over everything else, maintaining his mind was the one thing he was glad for. Now we simply wait. Now and again, his heavy eyelids opened. But nothing changed but the formation of stars suddenly appearing before falling away into an orbit of oblivion. Suda felt a stir of darkness creeping through his formless body again. This time, his vision went dark, and the horrible sensation of falling engulfed him in the blanket of a frigid silence. Suda remembered the Fuji Mountains. Why's the air turned so frighteningly cold all of a sudden? I can hear the sharp winds too. It feels so frigid, like I'm outside in the blistering winter, he thought to himself. Suda found himself stirring within a blanket of darkness. It was a very strange sensation, given he held no real memory of when he had fallen asleep under such rigorous conditions. But one thing was certainly clear. Something strange had taken place, and now, he was cold, very cold. Slowly, his eyelids gently opened, and he found himself seated against a firm, sparkling ground, surrounded by layers of endless snow-white hills and a majestic floor layered beneath him made out of solid, crystallized purple ice. Suda almost immediately jumped away in fright, suddenly aware he was sitting on purple ice. Purple ice? That doesn't make any sense. He studied his newfound, disturbing surroundings a little more. If this was a dream, he was surely hoping he'd wake up right about now. But then he poured cold water over that theory soon enough. When have I ever been aware I'm inside a dream? Damn it, what's going on now? He reflected inwardly, expecting the worst. With his torso raised, he felt a fuzziness clouding his thoughts for a brief moment. Something was wrong here. He smoothed his chin while instinctively folding his legs to make himself more comfortable. How did I get here? One moment, I was sitting on a hill. It was my birthday, wasn't it? And then next, Demoria slept beside me. I remember having that recurring nightmare. And then, Suda took a careful look around again. A strange airiness clung to the skyward heavens above him. Lowering his gaze, he beheld misshapen diamond hills scattered around him in the near distance, the morning light casting a whimsical glow against their surfaces, and a crystalline sheen oddly sparkled off them. In the far distance, a forest beckoned him, with leaves colored violet and gray bark. He He swallowed harshly, slowly coming to grips with the dire situation at hand. Okay, so, this is definitely not Granny's farm anymore. Just when he was running out of speculative theories, a voice softly chimed not so far away. His heart fluttered with relief as he twisted around to find her. Merc. What's going on? Suda. Is that you? Suda followed the direction of her voice and found Demoria lying on her side as she seemed to stir herself awake. Her dreary gaze took in her surroundings, and Suda watched her go through the exact process as he did moments ago. Wait, what the hell? Where am I? Her eyes finally moved towards him. Suda, you're here as well? Where are we? What did you do? Come clean immediately. Why would I be the culprit? She's the one with the freakishly strong powers. But my track record of suddenly waking up in new worlds doesn't shed a positive light on things, I guess. Wait, this couldn't be another one of those instances? See, could it? That harrowing thought left a visibly shaken Suda staring aimlessly into nowhere. Is this the fishbowl head's doing? Demoria rose to her feet, dusting her dress down before she took a careful look around their very unfamiliar surroundings. Her narrowed gaze thoroughly took in the scene around her. Suda could tell she was growing concerned the more she saw. Suda, this place is odd. Everything seems backwards and strange. Her words were understandable. Even he knew this wasn't a place they should be right now. There weren't any immediate signs as to why or how they got here. But this clear, open space was unsettling. We should be careful, but we have to take a look around. There has to be some sort of clue here that will tell us where we are. Over there, that forest, I can vaguely see a footpath there. For Suda, who had experienced the sudden unpredictability of awakening inside an entirely new world, he felt less scared than Demoria was right now. Her eyes wouldn't stop darting around nervously as they made their way. The grip against his hand was also tightening each time a rustle sounded from the unknown within this crowded forest. Once they entered the forest, the leaves were a strange violet tint, whilst the crunchy ground layered beneath his feet was a mixture of blue, dark red, and gray. And what kind of forest is this anyway? He wondered, unsure if this place could be called a forest. Everything his eyes met, down to the tiny, strange bug creatures he saw crawling against thin branches, looked weird. And not the good weird, but the very strange weird. Some of them were blue in color with orange underbellies and massive, bulbous heads. The other critters he met were also of the weird variant. Tiny monkeys with white fur inspected both he and Demoria from a lofty perch above. Only they had 3 eyes and 4 arms. Thankfully, these strange things don't seem hostile. But there's no telling what we might run into. Demoria is our only source of fighting power right now, but who's to say she won't freeze up in the face of danger right now? Suda was considering the worst-case scenario, judging by Demoria's very sheepish demeanor. He couldn't bank on her being ready to defend them both. After all, she was inexperienced and very much still a 16-year-old girl. He remained vigilant as he led them through the slithering gray road. More strange animals appeared but remained docile from a safe distance. He eventually noticed a small clearing up ahead and rather hastily shuffled his unsteady feet towards it. After folding away a tussle of large blue leaves, they arrived at a small circular opening in the forest. A dark grayish boulder sat right in the middle, but the boulder wasn't the source of intrigue to both of their scrutinizing eyes. For the creature, or the thing they noticed nonchalantly seated atop it, drew their attention rather quickly. Demoria quickened her footsteps a little and slightly stood ahead of Suda. She cradled the top of her eyes while tilting her head slightly upward. Suda, what is that up there? She asked. Before Suda could say a single word, the creature at the top seemed to have noticed their presence. It spun around swiftly before audaciously leaping from the very top and hurling downwards towards them. Suda tapped Demoria's wrist and timely pulled her back as he took a step back himself. But the falling being timed its jump well, gracefully landing a few feet away from the duo with little to no sound. Once its silhouette finally appeared in clear view, Suda struggled for a few moments to carefully piece together what to call this creature. First of all, it was a lion, but it was standing on its 2 feet, dressed in a spotted onesie with red, blue, and yellow polka dots. Beneath its large paw was a black polished cane. Finishing the very out-of-place dress style was the fitted top hat placed on its head, covered in a dark brown mane. Suda visibly rubbed his two eyes a few times just to make sure he was seeing things. Is that a lion? Chapter 42. Welcome to Candy. Suda POV. Greetings, fellows from the divine shores. Your humble servant, Sir Mynx Salat, welcomes those of royal blood to our lands. The lion's bow was a perfect copy of one a butler might perform. Feeling incredibly uneasy, staring at the talking lion, Suda instantly took hold of Demoria in a bid to pull her behind him. Surprisingly, much to his dismay, he felt a stern force acting against him. Demoria, what are you doing? He voiced in a hushed whisper. Suda, look, it's a talking kitty, and it's behaving like a human. Isn't it cute? A talking what? Has she gone completely mad? Listen, Demoria, we need to be careful. We don't know where we are, or what these things can do. And by the way, have you never heard of a lion before? Suda muttered out of disbelief. What? What's a lion? Is that some kind of skill, Suda? Oh, should we ask the talking kitty where we are? Hey, mister, where is this place, and why are you speaking so strangely? She asked the lion. Suda couldn't believe just how nonchalant she was behaving. Does she have no sense of danger whatsoever? He thought harrowingly to himself. The lion slowly raised its large head, and Suda slightly flinched in response, unable to look past what was called the king of beasts standing right in front of him. Albeit dressed in a very weird attire, it was no doubt very much still a lion. I do not follow. Were the descendants of our most gracious sovereign not briefed on the promise made approximately 457 years ago? A promise between us inhabitants of the land, Candy, and Her Majesty, the Omnipotent One, Queen Lunara of Golden Dawn. That name sent a wave of memories flooding through Suda's brain. Queen Lunara? The first goddess of this world? And the one whom the Church of Dawn worships? Why is her name coming up here? He thought inwardly to himself. Candy? What's Candy? Demoria asked, stupefied. Is that what this place is called, Mr. Kitty? Her confidence and guile were both growing dangerously casual, and Suda was holding back the innate response to scold Demoria for her casualness in front of the unknown. Surprisingly, the talking lion didn't mind it. Suda even noticed a glimmer within its large, animated eyes. Yes, of course you don't remember. After 400 years of waiting, even I have forgotten a lot of that treaty we brokered. Ahem. Well, I guess we should start with the war between the Goodwill folk and the Deceptors. Long, long ago, in an age where my kin were driven to the brink of extinction, unlike Demoria, Suda wasn't too excited about the entire situation, and the more he studied things, the less he was confident about somehow this all being one terrible mistake. If this is down to the work of the fishbowl head, then there's something he wants me to do here. Suda felt a pang of worry settling in his stomach. He could vaguely just about remember that oath he vowed while he was at death's door. Damn it, isn't this too extreme? I'm not even an arcanist yet. So what could he expect me to do in this state? Amidst his daydreams, his attention filtered in and out during the talkative lion's story. Luckily, Demoria was incredibly enamored with the creature, which made it so that Suda's drifting thoughts were not picked up on. And once the battle was won, the magnificent queen liberated us from the shackles of those awful deceptors. Using her profound law of dawn, she banished those fiends to the depths of the cold shadows. And we, the Goodwill folk, have sworn to uphold this kingdom until the fateful day the nameless throne shall bear a ruler upon it once again. The nameless throne? Suda's brow furrowed a little deeper after he heard that. He had developed a knack for sensing the beginning of headaches, a lot of which tended to begin with the announcement of ominous things such as the story the lion was telling, which was the main reason he purposely didn't want to hear too much about this obscure lore. For now, he decided to watch, keep quiet, and listen. Follow me. It'll bring me no greater pleasure to welcome ye of royal blood to the magnificent castle. It stands on the highest hill on Salt and Pepper Isle. Let us make our way there. It's not too far of a walk, announced the lion. Oh yes, lead the way, thy faithful steward. Hey Suda, the kitty thinks he's a human, Demoria whispered to him rather loudly for someone standing so close. But perhaps the talking lion held no real care for her subtle rudeness. I do hope he doesn't eventually snap, Suda thought cautiously, paying extra attention to those huge, sharpened paws it casually waved around without a single care in the world. While the lion led the way, Suda took this moment to lean closer towards his companion. Listen to me. We need to be extremely careful here. There's no telling what awaits us in such a strange place. And I don't even think we should be too trusting towards that lion, he said slowly and quietly to Demoria. His name is Sir Mynx a lot. Suda, don't be so rude. Demoria corrected him with a slight scowl. Suda rolled his eyes in response, before exhaling a deep sigh. But you do have a point. This is not a dream, which begs the question, how did we manage to find ourselves here in the first place? She said while taking another look at their strange surroundings. Suda couldn't say anything if this was down to the fishbowl head. Then this was his problem. How could he begin to tell Demoria about Starfall, the Mana Storm, and his subsequent transmigration into another world? Despite Suda's reservations, he dutifully followed the bizarrely talking lion through the ever-changing, enchanting forest. The lion's presence seemed to spur the arrival of more whimsical creatures popping their heads out from the comforts of hidden blue bushes or an undergrowth of giant-sized mushrooms almost the size of a grown child. The most frightening-looking of the things he met were, without a doubt, the oversized caterpillars. Suda couldn't refrain from grimacing as he watched the horrifying shaped insects slithering down the discolored gray trees, thick as anacondas. They didn't walk too long before Suda found the surrounding forest unveiling its mysterious splendor, in place for an immeasurable spread of vast, colorful land. He felt his body tense up as his feet came to a steady halt. And within that moment, a dark reality dawned upon Suda. This isn't Granny's Gulp Farm anymore. Similar to a field of endless golden wheat, a land covered in cyan grass covered the ground layered as far as wide as he could see. The hills were a stark violet tint, and the gray sky only added to the incredible disparity of this place compared to his world. Far off into the distance, Suda's gaze trembled a little. Far away out beyond the bizarre rolling hills, he could see a tussle of silver clouds partially shielding away a strikingly bright blue castle with pink, tiled roofing. Suda couldn't believe what he was witnessing right now. Even the high-spirited Demoria looked visibly shaken by it. The duo could only exchange knowing looks of uncertainty. Something quite incredible had taken place, and somehow they had both been transported into another world. For Demoria, this once-in-a-lifetime scenario was perhaps just the side story she needed before entering a world completely alien to her, one which required her to leave behind her small family all of a sudden, forced to mature and hone herself on a continent far away. But in Suda's case, he couldn't hide the growing panic coursing through his bones. This was just like when he transmigrated into a new world. Everything was unexpected, strange, and sudden. Welcome, welcome to the lovely world of Candy. The lion's vociferous voice roared with delight. He gently knocked his elegant cane against the ground a few times, igniting the emerald stone affixed to the top of his cane to glow with a feverish light. Suda unconsciously took a step away from him, holding Demoria's wrist in the process. Although he didn't consider himself an expert in the slightest with the arcane and mystic powers, Suda felt an oppressive force emanating from that emerald jewel, a feeling that told him he couldn't ignore nor confront whatever power was currently being stirred in the air. Beads of sweat dotted against the nape of his neck, and he felt the tiny hairs along his arms standing tall. The lion pirouetted on his heels before holding out the glowing cane across a space in the air. Again, Suda was completely gobsmacked to see a strange green bubble enlarging before his very distrusting gaze. A milky cloud started to fill the bubble, and not before long a swash of gold and other colors appeared inside it too. Finally, the bubble burst, and for the second time, Suda was left completely stunned to see what looked like an incredibly elegant, white-painted cottage embroidered with royal gold had appeared. How did he just do? Before he could finish his thoughts, Demoria pried herself free from his grip and was currently jumping around the lion enthusiastically with excitement boosting her jumps. She's really enjoying all of this, isn't she? But more interestingly enough, that lion. Was that arcane magic it just used? Suda studied the possibilities of how it did that, and he could only arrive logically at that being the answer. Granny once mentioned to me that one of the components of casting was using materials, things such as magic stones, jewelry, or even stranger items that have been tainted with negative energies. She said all such things can allow an arcanist to draw power and use it. Suda, why are you dawdling around? Look, the kitty wants us to ride in the fancy carriage with him. Let's go, let's go. Demoria's high-pitched voice quickly brought him back to reality. He carried a lot of apprehension about all of this, but looking around himself, what other choices do we have right now? He thought depressingly before he climbed into the lavish white carriage behind Demoria. Chapter 43. Arriving at the Blue Castle, Doubts. Suda POV. Ever since his transmigration into a new world, Suda couldn't help imagining what those other worlds could possibly look like. Even if it was for a fleeting moment, a gentle pause amidst the chaos of affairs surrounding him, he did at times wonder, what if, and what could exist out there in this endless unknown of worlds? How could someone like him not hold a keen intrigue toward the existence of multiple worlds outside of Earth and its neighboring planets? Besides, it wasn't completely uncharacteristic for him, considering he was an avid consumer of all things fantasy-related. But alas, with all the plethora of indulged mangas, anime, and web novels, none of those could ever prepare him for the sight befalling his very eyes right now. As if the presence of the violet sky wasn't enough, his disbelieving gaze cast over a vast blanket of brightly blue grassland covering the entire land as far as he could see. The foliage was also startling to him. On more than one occasion, he noticed these strange, tiny flowers twitching amongst the tall grass below. The harrowing thing about these sentient plants was the ugly human faces they made while the carriage wheeled past them. Once he beheld them, Suda couldn't remove his gaze away, almost disgusted by their grimacing faces howling strange noises at their moving carriage. What the hell are dash? Suda's voice carried over to the lion seated in a gentlemanly manner adjacent to him. The lion perked up before briefly peering out of the side window, catching sight of the many little flowers swaying with the wind with faces of sorrow. Oh, can you hear their wretched songs? Terrible noise they make if you ask me. But if you listen closely, you might hear their laments for the new king, the runaway groom some call him. This land still mourns in wait for his return. 'Tis a shame what happened all those years ago. 'Tis a shame indeed, said the lion apathetically. Suda wore a concerned glare as he tried his best to hide his true thoughts towards the talking lion dressed in a polka-dot onesie. Whichever way you look at it, there's something not right about all of this, Suda thought depressingly to himself. By the way, Mr. Kitty, who lives in that huge castle over there? Demoria asked the lion curiously. Oh, don't you remember? I suppose it has been an awful long time. The royal castle has been somewhat vacant for a while now. Other than us loyal subjects, of course. We haven't seen anyone with royal blood in over, well, I'd say 100 years, explained the lion with an airiness to his tone. Something told Sutia the talking thing was pondering something. 100 years? That can't be right. Hey, do you remember the last royals who lived in that castle? Who were they? Suda asked the lion, intrigued by the subtle lore revealed to him. Oh, let me think, Oh, right, the Great Queen, of course, our benevolent mother of the perfect moon. She was left in such terrible sorrow after the groom suddenly disappeared and locked herself in the castle for so many years. But no fear, now that her descendants have finally returned, all must be well. The lion sang the final verse with a soft hum bouncing on his leonine maw. Suda naturally didn't miss a single thing the lion said. So this place is ruled by a queen, or it was at one point anyway. But the most troubling thing is why he believes we have royal ties to this so-called sovereign. Unless it's because we're human? He had a feeling his conclusion wasn't too far off. The only other truth could be that we did have royal blood. Although that seemed less likely to Suda, it wasn't something he could completely ignore. Suda gently massaged the side of his temples, understanding it was important he didn't panic and rather thoroughly processed everything. We both fell asleep and then woke up in this strange new world. If it was only me, then I'd suspect it was that fishbowl head's doing. But why bring Demoria? From what I could gather, secrecy felt like an imperative with that figure. Which means Suda really didn't want to consider the worst-case scenario. But the more logical outcomes he tried to pull from this situation, the closer he was edging toward that depressing thought. A deep sigh exhaled through his partially opened mouth. This was Demoria's doing or my own? He slowly opened his eyes again, casting a rather dark look out toward this colorful and bizarre-looking landscape. Unlike Demoria, who looked blissfully and rather ignorantly unbothered about this strange place, her mood even seemed to brighten beneath the whimsical and slightly nightmarish oddities surrounding them. Suda, on the other hand, only discovered his worries growing with every passing minute. We're here. Finally, we've arrived. The lion shuffled excitedly towards the door before gently using his cane to push the flimsy small door aside. Seeing the lion finally leaving, Suda thought he had a rare moment to converse with Demoria about some things. But much to his dismay, the moment he opened his mouth, Demoria had already swiftly dashed out of the carriage, tailing closely behind the lion. Another one of many deep exhales escaped through his mouth. Am I the last normal person here? Suda mockingly wondered to himself. Oh my word. Suda, quickly, come out and take a look at this. He heard Demoria's spirited calls from the outdoor. Reluctantly, Suda eventually did leave the carriage. He climbed out of the open door and landed securely against the strange blue grass beneath his soles. His constant scowl of distrust eventually lifted towards Demoria and the lion standing not too far away from him. The blue-haired girl was trying to pull the lion's fuzzy brown mane. The lion, on the other hand, was too busy observing something elsewhere to truly care. Suda followed its peculiar stellar gaze. The sight of what stood towering in front of him had made him forget about the doubts and lingering fears in his thoughts for a brief moment. Towering obnoxiously tall stood a castle as monstrous as anything Suda had ever seen in his entire life. He vaguely recalled images of these stone behemoths. Only standing so close to one painted a more surreal feeling. The sight gave him goosebumps as he was forced to tilt his neck back just to see the tiles at the very top. Whoa, that's big, too big, he exclaimed in marvel. Of course, Suda had never seen any real-life castles before, but he was familiar with the stereotypical outlay of these ancient buildings where kings and queens supposedly lived. There was a large square drawbridge halfway lowered, with the visible underside covered in decay and seaweed. He noticed the sizable gap between the land he was standing on and the adjacent hill the castle itself was built on. This gap looked to circle the entire castle from what he could tell. I think they called this a moat? The lion waltzed towards the edge of the land and held up his long cane adorned with that peculiar emerald crystal on its top. A soft glow began to emanate from the crystal, followed by the sounds of rusted iron being pulled by an unknown force. Suda lifted his gaze again towards the drawbridge, casting an inquisitive glare towards the two rusted iron chains gently slackening. As a result, the drawbridge lowered soon enough, leaving Suda with a number of questions and potential theories. That emerald is definitely an artifact, which means the lion can potentially cast a certain type of magic. He summoned a carriage and pulled the drawbridge down. But he couldn't just teleport us here and there. Suda's mind was like a series of whirring cogs. Thanks to the countless notes of Granny Baba's thoughts he was fortunate to have read, he understood that arcane magic purposefully had flaws. As Granny once said, arcane wasn't a tool that one could pick up and dump as they felt. There's a flaw or a trick to it. I guess that the emerald either allows him to summon and pull, or control a specific element, he deduced after reflecting on how arcane principles worked in regard to casting incantations. Suda thumbed his smooth chin in deep thought for a short while, after which his eyes suddenly flashed open as he discovered the missing piece to his theory. Wood, the carriage and the drawbridge? Perhaps the green emerald gives him control over wood element. Suda thought it would make sense, so he kept that truth noted down just in case he needed to use some sort of countermeasure against the lion in the future. Hey Suda, look, it's a real-life castle, just like the talking kitty said. You think there's a queen and knights and butlers and fancy dresses too? Demoria swooned with wanderlust dancing across those brightly sparking amber eyes of hers. There was a part of Suda that earnestly enjoyed seeing her smile and somewhat behaving like a kid. But there was another part of him, the more rational side, that couldn't help but feel annoyed at how casual she was taking all of this. Sigh. Demoria, listen. We need to be careful here. We have no idea where we are, how we got here, or how to even get back. We need to remember this place could be really dangerous, and I don't know about you, but I, for one, hold about zero confidence in myself if an unknown disaster arrives before us Suda meant every word he said, making sure he didn't mince his words at this moment. Demoria's glee looked to sour upon hearing that. Rather than the hopeful, deep thought he expected, she looked rather annoyed. Suda, don't be silly. You're overthinking too much and being a little boring if I'm being honest. Demoria raised her chin when she said this. Boring? Did she just call me boring? Look, it's a talking lion. A huge, dreamlike castle and singing flowers? What harm could these things possibly do to us? Ha ha ha. She proudly laughed with her two hands folded against her hip. Suda's brows narrowed. Hearing her childlike heckles only fueled his worry. Almost every time someone says that a problem appears, he thought darkly to himself. And don't you worry about any threats, I've gotten quite good at controlling my mana recently, so I'll protect us both. Okay? You don't have to worry, Suda. Suda could only depressingly exhale. He did wish he could hold the same optimism as his friend, but history had taught Suda that these strange occurrences were never so simple. After all, he had spent a time of relative peace on Granny's farm, recollecting that fishbowl head's warnings. Suda was almost expecting trouble to arrive on his doorstep eventually. I can't let my guard down regardless of what Demoria thinks. One of us needs to be prepared. Suda refused to change his way of thinking. This place was strange. He could feel it in his bones. Just when he thought his mood couldn't darken, he heard the lion's voice again. Let me formally welcome you both to the castle of never-ending dreams and, of course, to the capital of our wonderful land, Candy, a glorious haven built for the sake of our most gracious queen. As he tended to do, he finished with a gentle hum before proudly waltzing across the drawbridge alone. Demoria giggled softly before she too trotted off after him, leaving Sutia standing alone on the illustrious bluegrass. He watched the backs of the two, Demoria's in particular, filled with an extra bit of glee and playfulness in her step, and for a short moment, Suda began to ponder on whether he was overthinking things. Was all of this one strange and rather peaceful dream? Perhaps the Mana Storm disaster had left a scar on his way of reasoning, where even the small belief in peace felt alien to him. Maybe I am the problem, he considered for a moment to himself. He took this time to truly observe what was in truth, a truly breathtaking surrounding enveloping him. Suda felt a small sense of release from his earlier qualms, stripping away his misgivings. In the soft lulls appearing against the blanket of gray fog in his thoughts, Suda tenderly beheld this strange world for the first time. Amidst his expressionless gaze, he just so happened to trail the blue-bladed grass pooled beneath him. His eyes slightly trembled as he caught the sight of one of those slender, talking sunflowers with grimacing faces. The flower constantly swayed as though it were drunk, just before its half-opened eyelids fell towards him. Its quite horrific-looking, misshapen mouth began to open, followed by a high-pitched squeal of words irritating his ears. All hail Abra! The king has returned. All hail Abra! The misbegotten prince is here. All hail Abra! The king of Candy! Suda grimaced at the sight of the nightmarish thing, and suddenly, that small sense of peace had dutifully been erased altogether, leaving him more disgusted and annoyed than before. He raised his boot and trampled on the flower, squishing it down into the mud until its scratchy voice had ceased. No, what was I thinking? This place is wrong. So wrong. And I need to get us out of here fast. Renewed with his earlier beliefs, Suda straightened his posture while placing a hand against his beating heart. He exhaled a warm breath to calm himself down before cautiously making his way along the lower drawbridge. Chapter 44. Arriving at the Blue Castle, the castle of never-ending dreams. Suda POV. Entering the immense castle hall, Suda was graced with an incredibly luscious sight. A grand hall that spanned nearly twice the size of any cathedral his eyes had ever witnessed. Judging by the sheer vastness before him, he could scarcely fathom how many more spacious chambers dwelled within these walls. This is undoubtedly a castle fit for royalty. To call such a grand manor home, the mere thought of whiling away his days amid these echoing corridors shattered any naive fantasies he may have harbored. Though Suda favored tranquility, the oppressive silence would surely drive him to madness. Before him rose an ivory staircase, its countless steps climbing towards a mezzanine adorned with stone railings. Peering through the gaps, He spied glassed ornaments and mirrors lining the upper walls. The ground comprised squared gray stone, yet its simplicity did little to dull the exquisite interior. Even Suda had to admit this place befitted a sovereign. Deep crimson curtains flowed luxuriantly while glittering chandeliers hung above polished chrome pillars. His gaze wandered to the towering walls, either graced with arched windows or displaying bizarre murals of animals garbed in knightly armor. Well, nice to see the weirdness remains consistent, he mused, observing a tawny cat in an elegant gray suit of armor. Beside it stood a crocodile clad as a musketeer, one arm resting on a wooden stool. Suda exhaled an exasperated sigh before following Demoria's spirited voice down one of the many wide halls. As the day carried on, he and Demoria were escorted through the castle's ground floor by none other than Sir Mynx, a name Suda refused to utter out loud under any circumstances. It took hours to traverse from the towering entrance to the largest kitchen imaginable, and then down to the cellars stocked with obscene amounts of dried provisions. Here, Suda encountered another pair of whimsical, clothed creatures, two foxes dressed in baker's whites, conversing animatedly over meal preparations for the entire castle. With an expressionless mask concealing his intrigue, he observed the furry sketching plans amidst scribblings and crude seating illustrations. They eventually sensed the arrivals, startled upright into greeting them with solemn bows. The dining halls they visited dwarfed any room prior, filled with rows of long, polished glass tables and plush chairs that could host 30 per table. Lining the walls were at least 24 maids, long-mouthed, floppy-eared dogs in black suits and unmoving white-gloved hands. Other noteworthy chambers included the strategy room, armory, a combat hall overseen by a slumbering bear in an oversized kimono, and lastly, the ceremonial hall, the most elegant yet. Here, two unmissable rose-cushioned, golden-framed thrones sat against a far wall of dark stone. Suda might have admired them, were it not for another giant mural resting against the wide wall behind them, depicting not animals, but humans, the first he'd seen in this strange castle. Perhaps illuminated by bright windows, a luminous white glow almost masked the slender standing figure's face, revealing only tumbling golden curls falling down slender pale-skinned arms. But in the seated woman before them, Suda found shocking familiarity. Olive-skinned and draped in white and blue silks, various amber and sapphire rings adorning her slender fingers, with immiscible deep blue hair gracing her neck and chest. As his gaze met her dull eyes within the frame, his heart almost stopped. What the hell? Is it just me, or does she look strangely like me? Demoria's concerned voice sounded beside him. Suda turned to face her mask of slight horror as she stared off with a complicated expression. So she finally realizes this place is weird. About damn time, he inwardly scoffed. That woman is strikingly similar to Demoria. I'd even say if Demoria were much older, they'd be identical down to the smallest details. The troubling thought gnawed at him as the ominous atmosphere deepened the worry in his heart. I guess that's why they think we're royalty. Unless... His eyes drifted to Demoria's profile, unconsciously raising questions. How much do I truly know about her? She's my friend, yes, but what else? Even about Granny Baba? She wields that strange golden eye that almost killed me that one time. With her recently awakened S-rank powers, the growing unease wouldn't allow him to dismiss the possibility that Demoria was deeply connected to their plight. As much as he wished it untrue, all signs pointed to her immense power as the cause. Look too deeply and I miss the forest. Focus on the trees and I miss the world. I should be careful and take this slowly. Demoria extended a dainty hand, pointing to the towering painting ahead. Mr. Kitty, who is that? She asked uneasily. Era, why, that's none other than our great benevolent mother, the gracious queen of candy herself. Suda sank deeper into the plush rose-colored chair, finally allowing his weary body to rest. He released a deep exhale, the day's accumulated fatigue weighing heavily upon him. Gently opening his half-lidded eyes, his expressionless gaze beheld the towering mirrors lining the wall before him. The lion, Sir Mynx, had, at last, permitted them respite in this lavishly appointed lounge area connecting two spacious chambers where they could settle for the night. A sparkling golden chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling above as Suda's mind drifted, wondering how he could possibly save them from this strange predicament. Perhaps we should simply wait for Granny? Surely an arcanist of her prowess is doing everything in her power to find us. Yes, that may be our best recourse. He harbored no doubts that she could uncover a way to their rescue, provided she was aware of their plight. Although, wherever this place is, I do hope it's not completely severed from the rest of the world. That disastrous possibility chilled him to the core, for it would almost certainly leave them stranded without hope of ever returning home. The soft creak of parting double doors stirred Suda away from his daydreams, where his gaze landed upon a vision of radiant beauty. Demoria? He almost blinked thrice to make sure he wasn't seeing things. She was now garbed in a bright, finely tailored gown, skipping jovially towards him. "Hey Suda, look, I found these clothes and they fit me perfectly. Hee. How weird is that?" Suda lazily appraised her from head to toe. "Yeah, weird indeed. Don't be shy. Suda, go on. Tell me how pretty I look." Demoria fawned, pirouetting on her toes as the wide hem of her dress swirled enchantingly, her lush, dark blue tresses cascading in the gentle breeze. Even Suda could not deny the girl's lily-like beauty beneath the soft lighting. At times, he forgot she was only 17, for despite her childlike mannerisms, she carried an aura of mature allure that often dazzled and intrigued him. Quickly realizing where his thoughts strayed, he shook his head firmly to dispel them. "Hey Demoria, we need to talk," he beckoned after clearing his throat. Sensing the seriousness in his tone, she sighed dismissively. "Ugh, I hope it's not about more boring things, Suda. Why don't you try livening up a little?" Granny said frowning all the time will make your face crippled, you know? CRI crippled? I don't think that's quite how that saying goes, he thought, brows furrowing slightly. "I'm serious, Demoria. We have to be cautious here. There's no telling what dangers lurk in this bizarre place. And you're letting your guard down around that talking lion a lot dash. His name is Sir Mwinex a lot, Suda. Don't be rude. He's a perfect gentleman," she chided, practicing her curtsy in one of the tall mirrors. "PSK, he's a talking lion in a onesie. At best, he has a few screws missing in his head. At worst, this is all an act. I advise you to be wary lest he suddenly flips out and goes crazy," Suda warned gravely. "Ha ha ha. Flip out and go crazy?" Demoria tried and failed to stifle her laughter behind a dainty hand. "Suda, you worry too much. Do you think I'm that silly? Of course, I'm aware of the potential peril we face. Why else would I be so accommodating to the talking kitty? Surely you haven't forgotten whose power eclipses all others here." Suda held her gaze, bewildered for a moment as he gauged her sincerity. "So you're saying this has all been an act? Mem, it's better if they think us allies rather than foes, especially when we haven't the foggiest idea where we are or how formidable they might be." Granny always said an arcanist must be 5 steps ahead at all times, Demoria concluded with a raised chin. Genuine surprise spread across Suda's features as he considered her prudent words. She's right. If one of us can ingratiate ourselves, perhaps we can glean information from one of these fairies and find a way home. Scratching his head sheepishly, he marveled at when Demoria had become so bright. Perhaps I should give her more credit. A self-mocking smile creased his lips as he pondered his cynicism of late. The Mana Storm disaster had understandably fortified walls around his heart, walls he deemed necessary after the mental trauma he'd endured. Though he trusted Demoria implicitly after their 100 or so days spent together, the wider world filled him with caution. A world that could so easily deceive and corrupt even the purest of hearts. I suppose she's right. I should try to relax a little. One of the double doors creaked softly open, with peculiar footsteps following swiftly after the other. Lifting his gaze, Suda was surprised to see Sir Mwinex a lot accompanied by another strangely dressed furry. "Is that a crow?" he mouthed louder than intended. Chapter 45. Arriving at the Blue Castle, the Great Lord Peltos. Suda POV. Strolling beside the jovial-looking lion was a black-feathered crow, just a foot shorter than the tall lion. The crow was dressed in a flourishing long dark gown with a bright purple satin interior. The gown, which looked very much like an oversized robe, was held together by a peculiar round disc ornament, cyan in color with a polished surface. Oh ho ho, what a great honor! What a great honor indeed! To welcome the children indeed, the children of the golden sun, to our most beloved land. Candy. The crow's sonorous voice echoed like an opera musician. Suda frowned. Why is it repeating itself? Bravo, bravo. Mr. Birdie. Demoria swooned with pattering applause. The crow seemed visibly shocked at being addressed in such a manner. After studying the girl for a few moments, the black-feathered bird leaned towards the lion in a failed attempt to conceal its voice. Say, what's a birdie? The lion, none the wiser, shrugged in response. I haven't the slightest bit of clue, but we mustn't object. They are part of the lineage of Dawn, after all. Suda watched the two with a curious glint in his eyes. The phrase lineage of Dawn lingered in his mind once again. Ahem, forgive my rudeness, but allow me to formally introduce myself. I am Lord Peltos, the Watcher of the Manor. Ever since our gracious mother's slumber, I have been overseeing all matters concerning our queen's sovereign rule. Ahem. It's an honor. It's an honor. Forgive my rudeness, but All right, we get it. Suda interrupted. Hey, Mr. PL Toys, he mouthed awkwardly. This queen or mother fellow, what happened to her? And where is she now? Suda asked the crow sternly. HM? You don't know? He doesn't know? The crow questioned. No, he mustn't know. The lion spoke. Should probably know, though, no? The lion shrugged again, unsure what to say next. Perhaps they were never told? Said the lion. Should have been told. We were told, no? But we are our mother's most loyal. Even Panda wasn't told. Ah, of course. But aren't they lineage of Dawn? Should be. They smell like them. But only those born during the dawn should know? No? Yes, that's right. So, who are they if they were not born in dawn? Wait, we weren't born in dawn. So why do we know? The crow kept silent, rubbing its feathers against the underside of its beak in deep thought. That's a good point. Wait, wasn't it because we're mother's favorites? I don't know. Am I supposed to know? Sigh. Who knows? The crow sighed in defeat. Suta stood there, utterly dumbfounded, struggling to contain his frustration. He wanted to unleash a torrent of curses at the duo, but he held his tongue. Could this day get any worse? Now there are two of them. He sighed internally, massaging his temple. He could feel Demoria's sharp gaze boring into the side of his head. Remembering their earlier conversation, Suda tried extra hard not to voice his true thoughts in that moment. Listen, I must have forgotten, Suda said in a light-hearted voice, feigning innocence. We've been away for so long. Our memories are all muddled up, you see. The duo raised their eyebrows as if suddenly everything made perfect sense. Ah, of course. How did I not realize it before? The crow exclaimed. The mystics must have gotten to them. Era. Yes, the mystics. Remind me, who are the mystics again? The lion asked, finding the nearest seat and crossing one leg over the other. He peered inquisitively into the raven's beady eyes. You buffoon. The mystics are our enemies, the raven squawked. Oh, they are? Like the deceptors? Indeed. Considering our mother hated them both, I should think so. Ah yes, whoever mother hates, we too must hate. Well done, Lord Peltos. No, well done to you, Ceremon Exelot. You are the greatest ward, bringing the lineage of Dawn all the way out here. Era, I was merely lucky. You, Lord Peltos, are the greatest watcher and foreseer of all things righteous. Suda could feel a headache coming on as he witnessed these two babbling in circles. A simple question had turned into an entire routine, and now he was beginning to realize that any conversation with this pair would likely follow the same pattern. After heaving out a mouthful of air to release his tension, Suda straightened his posture. This time, he focused his attention solely on the raven. Suta stared intently at the crow, determined to get a straight answer. Hey, that woman in the picture over there, your mother, is she dead or not? H.A. Suda, don't be so rude, Demoria chided. PSK, we're getting nowhere with these two. Just trust me on this, Suda insisted, turning back to the crow. Hey, crow, I just need a yes or a no. Is that lady in the picture dead or not? The crow studied Suda in silence for a moment. Suda made sure his gesture towards the painting was clear. Dead, you say? Well, I shouldn't think so. You know, the crow stammered. Damn it, not this again. Suda thought, frustrated. We just need to know what happened to her. It's important for us to understand, Suda pressed on, putting on his best sympathetic smile. You see, we miss our mother so dearly. So why don't you tell us then? O great wanderer, the most loyal and radiant one. Why shouldn't you think the great mother has died? The crow's beady eyes glazed over with sympathy. Of course. Where are my manners? Ahem, children of dawn. It brings me no great pleasure to inform you that our benevolent mother is lost to this world. The lion dramatically pretended to faint, falling against the backrest of his chair. Ignoring their theatrics, Suda focused on the bits of information filtering through the madness. If she's gone, but not quite dead, where could she be? He asked the crow uneasily. Sniff, sniff. Well, it was over 10 eclipses ago. Sniff when our First Lord suddenly left her at the altar. What a terrible morning that was. Her beloved suddenly leaving her like that. Our great First Lord. Such a terrible ordeal. In the midst of his sudden departure, our mother lost the will to live. And so she. Yes, go on. What did she do? Suda insisted, growing impatient. Sniff, sniff. She killed herself. Wah! The lion's cries filled the entire hall. Oh no, dear kitty, it's all right. Demoria comforted the lion before turning to Suda. Why are you making them retell sad stories? Look, it's making them sad. Suda could hardly believe what he was seeing. Is she really putting on an act or actually siding with these two idiots? He exhaled heavily, trying to push away the lingering thoughts. Well, it's somewhat neither here nor there, the crow continued. Whilst it is undeniably true that we all bore witness to the tragedy that was our benevolent mother's last act of defiance against the tyrannical embrace of love. Well, yes, go on. Ahem, well, I don't ever venture beyond these walls enough to confirm, but there is a profound truth regarding matters of life and death on this lovely land called Candy. Ahem, you see, our beloved mother loved us so very much that she managed to accomplish something she herself called world-defying. Lord Peltos. You remembered. The raven nodded. Ahem, and that is, well, let's see if I remember it right. Saramwine a lot. Did you remember what our mother's world-defying declaration was? Who me? I thought you knew, Lord Peltos. I did. Well, I seem to have forgotten. How can that be? You brought it up, no? Did I? Can't seem to recall. Suda had grown tired beyond measure and was quite frankly cursing himself for even bothering. He pinched the bridge of his nose, heaving a few short, quick breaths. Idiots. I'm surrounded by idiots, he muttered to himself. Just as he was about to walk away, the crow suddenly raised a single wing. Ah, I've got it. I remember, friend. Isn't that delightful? Well, ahem. Where was I? Oh yes, the greatest miracle our dear mother had performed was death. Aha, that's what it was. It was death. Suda heard the bird clearly, but wasn't exactly sure what he meant by that. Death? He questioned in his mind. What about death? Well, ahem, you see. Our great mother made it so that none of the inhabitants of Candy can actually die. Chapter 46. The Plight of Two Moons. Suda POV. That night, Suda found himself stirring beneath the restless embrace of his turbulent thoughts. It was a somewhat usual endeavor for him since his transmigration, but nonetheless, each time felt as draining as the last. Thankfully, this world had its own cycle of day and night. The outdoor skies of purple had darkened into a reddish-brown tint. Heralding the skies ominously were two large moons. Suda lay against the soft, quilted fabrics of a very wide and grandiose queen-sized bed. The walls were covered in polished stone, with enough space to perhaps fit two more equally large beds. Strangely enough, Suda felt he much preferred the hardened short bed at Granny's farm compared to this prestigious and quite elaborate showy one. Maybe I'm just missing Toto, Snowy, and Granny, he rationalized within himself, his empty gaze lingering on the distant ceiling. Suda's mind was a tranquil storm, somehow feeling both at peace and at war within himself at the same time. He raised one of his arms, reaching forth towards empty air. Suda envisioned that within the palm of his hands, he could grab the entire world and break it apart. "Mom, where are you?" The question bore no intention of finding an answer. He merely spoke the secrets nestled in his heart. Suda continued to drift beneath the silent air until he heard the soft creak of a door being opened. His body awoke from its docile stillness, spurring him quickly upright into a seated position. Who goes there?" Suda breathed slightly anxiously, refusing to allow himself to be fully at peace within this strange place. He first saw a graceful shadow, then a fall of combed blue hair atop a girl clothed in a thin nightgown. Demoria quickly entered his room, closing the door gently behind her. Suda felt his nerves calming. He gracefully patted his chest before allowing his body to sink back down again. The soft pitter-patter of bare feet moved across the floors until he felt the soft mattress slightly deform from one side as Demoria climbed on top. Suda didn't remove his gaze from the ceiling. Demoria continued to shuffle across until she lay beside him, placing her head beside his feet whilst her delicately bony white legs rested across Suda's torso. He didn't mind it. She tended to do this back on the farm when it was just the two of them alone. For the first few minutes, nothing was said between them. Suda could faintly hear his companion's delicate breaths softly moving in a refreshing cadence. Just when he felt the rare blanket of sleep falling, Demoria's soft voice freckled into the cooling silence. "Suda, are you asleep?" she asked in a frail whisper. A soft moan escaped through his lips as he slowly opened his half-closed eyelids again. "No, but I was getting there." "What's on your mind, Demoria?" His voice felt a little hoarse. He knew he was physically exhausted more than anything. "A lot of things. Some good things and others. Well, I think I'm scared, Suda. I'm scared we might not make it back home." Suda didn't react too much to that revelation. Deep down, he somewhat guessed she would eventually express her truest self at some point. She was always like that. "Me too. I'm scared too," he admitted honestly. Suda was feeling fear deep inside, very aware that at any given moment, something terrible could befall either one of them. Only with the various things he had been through thus far, an instinct swiftly took over him, forcing his mind to think of a solution rather than wallowing in the problems at hand. "Perhaps I was always expecting something like this to happen eventually," he thought to himself. Those peaceful days spent on the farm were well and truly over. He sat upright, scratching the side of his itchy helm between the folds of dreadlocks tangled within his head. He placed an expressionless gaze towards Demoria, who beheld him from where she lay. "We somehow ended up here, so there surely must be a way for us to make it back," Suda said, holding on to the last piece of hope he had since learning of this place's existence. "Don't be too scared. I believe with the both of us, we can find a way home." He spoke with conviction in his slightly hushed tone. He noticed the stiffened mask against Demoria's face soften slightly. Beneath the faint light falling through the open drapes against his window, Demoria's enchanting gaze brightened like two topaz stones. "Why, you're right. We will make it out of here. Together." "Thank you, Suda." Seeing her confident smile brought a brief feeling of warmth running through his body. Suda exhaled a deep breath, placing his gaze towards the beautiful scenery of the outdoor world beyond his view. The strange blue grass shone a majestic maroon tint beneath the plume-red skies. The harrowing sight to Suda was, of course, the large twin moons. "How the hell was I supposed to sleep with those things staring at me?" Suda slightly frowned before turning away in a bid to forget about the scowling moons. By the time he shifted his stare towards Demoria, the blue-haired girl was gently snoring with a jovial look of glee set against her face. Suda shook his head while wearing a slight smile. "At least one of us can sleep peacefully tonight." He made himself comfortable, gently resting his two palms beneath his head. Sleep had eluded him for now, so instead, he decided to conjure those imaginary clouds again. There was a thrill of excitement as he watched the magenta crackle of thunder stir between the clouds, followed by the all-too-familiar rows of symbols forming the particles and arcane theories he had read during his time on Granny's farm. As the morning arrived, Suda was grateful to see the grimacing twin moons sink away, replaced by a scorching sun that reignited the warm tones of the bizarre outdoor world. Suda and Demoria had washed themselves and gotten dressed in well-fitted clothes. The former couldn't decide whether these strange clean garments were purposefully made for them or if they belonged to someone else. Trying his hardest not to get his mind wrapped up in any of the lurking mysteries regarding this place, he chose to ignore the obvious problem about all of this. But the style of clothes did remind him of a fable sort of Victorian style. The jovial lion appeared before them again, and the trio made their way along another one of the nearly identical spacious halls. Layered against the stone ground was a crimson rug with gold fading and noticeable embroidery stitched along the edges. Suda found himself observing more of the castle's inner surroundings this morning, particularly the tall oil paintings aligned against the walls that passed by. He couldn't shake away the strange feeling every time he observed the obscure contents of the paintings. They depicted either strange furry animals dressed in human attire or a golden-haired youth with long, angelic curls flowing down past his waist. The youth was either pictured in front of an outdoor backdrop, where a series of blended colors created a dreamlike space behind him, or in a very elegant chamber, seated behind a table with a quill and an open book before him. The strangest thing about the paintings was the deliberate distortion of the fellow's actual face. Seeing this made Suda frown. Why is he purposely hiding his face? He wondered. Nonetheless, he soon placed these matters elsewhere as the trio arrived at the end of the lengthy hall, where a descending stairwell, also covered in the same crimson rug, spiraled towards the lower floor. Suta could hear voices from the bottom of the stairwell before he laid eyes on the disturbance. Once they scaled down, both he and Demoria stood noticeably shocked by whom they found engaging in quite a spirited discussion. Suda slightly tilted his helm to one side. He couldn't decide which one between the pair was more startling. First, there was a floating purple-furred cat, dressed in a large pointed dark wizard hat and wearing a dark cape that covered its entire body. Its eyes were a startling spiral of different colors. As he took a careful look at the cosplaying feline, he realized it was sitting cross-legged against a very thick, sealed book with coarse leather covering. As for the second strange animal, the short figure was adorned in silver-plated armor, wearing a closed visor shaped like a bird, with a red and gray feather curving away from the tip of its iron helm. Judging by its white furry stump of legs, the only bits of its miniature body not covered in armor, Suda guessed there was a white rabbit hidden beneath that half-iron armor. But then a lingering question played on his mind. How did it manage to get its ears in there? He deeply wondered about this as he moved a little closer to get a better look at the short thing. In the process, he was completely oblivious to the strange looks everyone else was giving him. Suda's curiosity got the better of him as he wondered about the rabbit's hidden ears. Maybe they're folded down its back? Or perhaps they're very short ears. Would it be rude if I asked? A strange glint appeared in his eyes as he unconsciously moved his hand towards the short rabbit, completely oblivious to his advances. Just as he was poised against its shadow, the tiny, armored animal noticeably shivered and slowly started to turn around to meet the assailant bearing down on him. Before Suda had a chance to withdraw, a ball of black smoke conjugated right before him, forcing him to take a step back. He watched as the swirl of thick smoke slowly shifted into a silhouette before completely forming into the same floating purple-furred cat he had met before. With a dazzling and slightly crazed smile, the cat greeted him abruptly. "Pleasure to meet you, saintly prince, born from the lineage of dawn. Fufufu, you can call me Sanza. Some fellows call me the one who knows all, whilst the very few say I am the wisest enchantress of candy and others, Fufufu. Let's just say others have no more voice to say anything against me anymore. Mwahaha, pardon me, that was a little joke." Before Suda could express the growing feelings of horror festering in his heart towards that declaration, the feline suddenly vanished into a wisp of smoke. "Oh my, who do we have here?" He heard the voice alarmingly from his rear, so he twisted on his heels in haste, finding the violet-furred cat had appeared right in front of an equally surprised Demoria this time. Suda could barely keep up with the feline's strange movement, which drew a deep frown against his observing gaze. Can she use a magic? He wondered with a slight notion of fright towards that possible truth. While Demoria was trying her best to maintain an air of politeness and less of shock, the floating cat continued buzzing around her, inspecting her entire being from head to toe. Suda felt less worried, noticing the cat had an air of esteem and a playful look of admiration towards Demoria. You are quite the beautiful girl, aren't you? Yes, yes. This is good. You are strong. I can sense it, proud and filled with the graceful blessing of youth. How wonderful indeed. While the cat continued singing nothing but praises, a slightly discerned look appeared on Suta's face. Hey, where was all of this for me? He was completely forgotten about with little to no effort at all. And to make matters worse, he was forced to endure that weird lion joining and heaping Demoria with more praises. The girl in question couldn't hide her embarrassment. She lowered her head slightly, but her beet-red cheeks were hard to mask beneath her tussle of flowing blue hair. Suda sighed to himself, creasing a wry smile. Well, as long as she's happy, I guess. It's all right then. Ahem. Excuse me there. Sire, I forgot to introduce Dash. Suda heard a strange voice from his rear. Turning around, he saw a tiny being wearing a closed visor standing right against his shadow. Suda jumped in fright, not expecting the little fellow to be so close. His sudden movement seemed to have startled the short-footed animal also, as the noises of its clattering iron echoed as it bounced a few spaces away from Suda. Forgive me, sire. I didn't mean to scare you. It stammered awkwardly in a slightly muffled voice, trying to find its footing on its long, stubby feet. Suda became aware of the little fellow again, once more reminded of that conundrum clawing at his mind about the placement of its ears. And what's your name then? He asked the tiny-sized knight with intrigue after calming down. HM? Oh, my name? I am the first knight called Hector, sire. And it's quite the honor to be in the presence of a descendant from the lineage of Dawn. Chapter 47, Ser Hector the Noblest. Suda POV. The lineage of Dawn again. Suda's brows furrowed briefly before his gentle expression reappeared. It's a pleasure to meet you, graceful knight Hector, he replied with a boyish smile, trying his best to be polite this morning. Despite the growing annoyance these strange talking creatures imposed, perhaps he could find one fellow he could tolerate here. Besides, I need someone I can somewhat trust to provide me with information. WHWH at, think. Why you? SSS sire. Oh dear, what do I do? The tiny armor-clad figure fidgeted restlessly, its iron plates clattering noisily. Is the little guy shy, or is it a girl? Suda wondered, deeply intrigued by the little fellow. His attention was disturbed by a shrill voice that sounded from behind. Aha, I've just thought of a great plan. The floating feline's pointed hat appeared first, followed by a smoky black wisp forming into a sleek, violet-furred cat. Suda took a strong gulp watching the cat materialize into existence. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. Why don't you spend the morning with our noble knight Ser Hector? Fofo. The cat suggested with a mischievous grin. Suda's gaze trailed down to the miniature knight, who pointed at itself in disbelief. A sudden idea flashed across Suda's mind. This might be a good way to learn more about this world and plan our next move to find our way back home. Although he was almost certain that the shady talking cat held its ulterior motives, Suda saw it as an opportunity. I also believe a Prince of Dawn would benefit from basic combat lessons, no? It gives us ladies a chance to study the more arcane ways of the world instead. What are you? Suta started to protest before he found his words cut short by a sudden blue-haired girl's spirited voice. That sounds like a great idea. Demoria chimed in, her face beaming with excitement. Why is she eager to split us up? He thought worryingly, but he very quickly recalled the conversation they had the previous night. Since then, Suda had been thinking about how he treated Demoria, forgetting between the two of them she was in fact the one with more experience as well as strength. I suppose she has a plan. He sighed to himself, scratching the side of his head in defeat. Suda realized he needed to trust her more, ignoring the fading voice of defiance inside him against this plan. Looks like I'll be in your care then, Ser Knight. He begrudgingly agreed with another one of his fake boyish smiles. Demoria jumped into his arms. Taken aback, momentarily Suda could feel her delicate frame relaxing within his hold. Her heartbeat gently resonated through their embrace, and Suda felt something he wasn't sure how to process. A sense of warmth nestled within his heart. Thank you, Suta, she whispered. Shortly after, Suda and the noisily clanking knight crossed the lower drawbridge into the warm, still air. Anxiety plagued Suda's every thought. Will she be okay? Was this a good idea? What if something happens? Damn, I should have refused. That cat can't be trusted. A cat in a pointed hat. Seriously? Maybe I should turn back. Amidst his tumultuous thoughts, a shy, muffled sound caught his attention. Excuse me, sire, but you seem to have a lot on your mind, the little knight stammered. Suda raised a brow in surprise. You can tell? The helmet nodded with a soft clatter. Suda chuckled mockingly to himself. I've never been good at hiding my feelings. Old habits die hard. It's okay. I tend to have many things to consider too, the little knight revealed. Oh, like what? Tell me of the great troubles that plague you, Sir Knight. Suda smiled slightly, trying to probe further. Well, there's the matter of, getting caught outside during the eclipse. It finally announced with a slight tremor in its muffled voice. An eclipse? Suda pondered, his lingering gaze spurring the fellow to continue. I've never been permitted to leave the castle so close to an eclipse, but if I don't find my mount, then… so that's what this is about? A lost horse. Suda felt relieved, ruling out any dangerous situations this morning. I see. Do you know where you lost this mount of yours? I think so. First, we'll look at Whispering Lagoon, and if not there, then… No, we can't go there. Forget I said anything. Suda chuckled childishly. Did he think I'd let that slip go unnoticed? Come on, you can tell me. We're companions for the day, aren't we? Don't companions share everything with each other? The little fellow flinched. Suda could hear its iron practically rattling as it showed signs of shivering. See, companion? With sire? I am unworthy. It mumbled breathlessly. Pfft, don't be silly. The moment we agree on something, we've already become companions. How about this? Instead of sire, or whatever you're mumbling there, why don't you call me Suda? Suda's words practically rendered the knight a babbling, crisscross walking mess. Oh dear, no. How could a lowly servant like me be graceful enough to speak sire's true name? A name only our mother utters. No, I must humbly refuse, sire. Suda frowned. This guy, Kesuke. What if I ordered you? Then I'd have to personally reject it and march myself to the dungeons for such blasphemy. And if I refuse that punishment too, then what? Then I will fall on my sword, sire. I would be unable to live with such shame. My goodness, why so extreme? Suda observed the little knight with wide eyes for a brief few moments. Okay, SI sire is fine, but riddle me this at least. What's so special about this eclipse? It sounded like something bad might happen if we were caught up in it. How is that possible? The tiny knight remained silent for a moment or two. For you, sire, there will be no problem at all. After all, those born of dawn do not share the same accursed fate as us native inhabitants of Kandy. And what kind of curse are we talking about here? He pressed the knight. The tiny fellow twisted its closed helmet towards him and said with a slight weariness to its muffled tone, the kind of curse that turns every inhabitant of Kandy caught outside into monsters, sire. 3 miles west of the Blue Castle. Suda narrowed his gaze, watching the distant horizon create an intriguing contrast of colors layered between the purple skies and cyan grass. He had to admit that the strange hues and tints of his peculiar surroundings made for quite a picturesque scene. He continued trailing behind the lead of the little fellow, whose presence Suda found to be a surprising breath of fresh air. Compared to the other weirdos he'd bumped into, at least the slightly anxious little knight was rather straightforward. The kind of fellow who couldn't lie to you under any circumstances. The downside, however, was that Suda quickly realized the fellow couldn't keep any secrets to himself. They walked for what felt like half a mile until Suda noticed a stark change in his surroundings. The matted cyan beds of grass slowly became more sparse, giving way to patches of uneven, earthy ground. Whitish, stony surfaces began to appear, and Suda eventually found himself face to face with a tall, random limestone plinth. He stopped by the face of this slender monument, attracted by the hard-to-miss swirl of symbols etched into the surface at eye level. There's something unusually familiar about this. I wonder. Without thinking too much more about it, he slowly closed his eyelids and allowed both his body and mind to sink into stillness. He rehashed the breathing technique Granny had talked him through that one time. Suda only needed to experience things a single time before his memory stored it. 8 breaths in, 8 breaths out. Allow my thoughts to trace along the pathway of my meridians. Although the path is clogged and covered in stones, trace the faint route towards my bosom, towards the hollow cave where my dormant core sleeps. He felt the presence of his inner self, slowly approaching that unfamiliar yet very real dormant core in his gut. Unlike the first time Suda vaguely remembered sensing it, this time he could just about feel every frail web latching desperately onto the core's shell. The shell itself was like a silvery, translucent stone, floating on a pool of glittering carmine ink. I'll call you, slumbering silver, Suda mused to himself. Next, he began to draw the tiniest wisps of mana away from the slumbering silver. With the deftest precision of a heart surgeon, Suda drew away what felt like small, warm currents from the stone. The thinnest webs of warmth began filtering through his body, along his blood vessels, up through his channels, before settling against his nasal area. An uncomfortable itch appeared behind his eyes, making Suda forcefully blink a few times. Upon opening his irritated lids the 5th or so time, his vision had surprisingly changed into a blurry mask that turned his view into a colorful spectrum, through which every object he could see was arrayed in colorful particles. A short gasp freed itself from between his lips. Finally grasping hold of what this meant, his dry mouth curved into a wild grin. Well, I did it. Reinforcing Granny Baba's earlier declaration, he could, in fact, understand the ancient language of arcane, the very first step of casting incantations. If only my core wasn't dormant. How depressing. He rued what could have been, as Granny had informed him that having the ability to understand not 1, not 2, but 5 different arcane languages was nothing short of a miracle. Suda scanned across the shimmering, glowing words aligned against the slab of stone. Here lies a remembrance of their union. Beyond the hills asunder, unveils the point between 2 stars where he, her beloved, conjoined 2 blazing stars into one. With a strand of the sunset at his fingertips, a most glorious birth of a new element was born. Starfire. This pillar marks the point where they first met. Both he the golden prince, and she the princess of the frosted north. As he thought about the increased difficulties he was set to encounter along his arcane journey, Suda couldn't help but strategize the possible ways for him to overcome this problem. He suddenly felt a throbbing headache, followed closely by his vision blurring. Suda momentarily lost his balance, but luckily found his footing before he toppled over. His hands smoothed against his temple. There wasn't much panic from him, considering he kind of expected this outcome. Channeling the tiniest wisps of mana is still causing me this much strain. So I was right when I regarded the process of reading runes and incantations as a form of spell casting. Suda thought to himself, smiling bitterly. His plight seemed quite the problematic endeavor. Sire? He heard the slightly high-pitched voice sounding beside him, dutifully awakening him out of his stupor. Are you all right? The little fellow asked him. For some reason, Suda felt a musing warmth dousing the cold feelings he nestled in his heart. Suda folded back the loose strands of electric pink dreadlocks covering his face. A profound gaze lingered within his stare as his gaze lowered down. Why yes, shall we continue? There's nothing I can do about this body's problems, but I can focus on the road ahead. Rado Suda. Shan't we see what adventures await us in this strange world then? A warm smile birthed across his youthful features. Chapter 48, Rotted Lion's Skin. Suda POV. Suda eyed the unknown new area with a mixture of apprehension and marvel. With the little knight leading the way, he was half confident about his footsteps, whilst also nervily on edge concerning what sort of troubles may befall them at any given moment. There stood a golden road, trailing away into a dark woodland. Hector was adamant that they followed it, suggesting it was the quickest route to the lagoon. Giving the Cyan Meadows one lasting look, he shrugged his 2 shoulders before gesturing towards the little knight to lead the way. Along their way, Suda passed by the roots of thick trees almost 10 meters high. He watched throngs of these same thick roots wove into one another like a cluster of vines. Hey, tell me a little about this Queen Mother person, Suda asked with wide eyes, practically taking in his every surroundings intently. Sire? Oh right, our gracious mother. She was noble, majestic, fair, and, in the same breath, unfathomably terrifying. Suda found those choices of words alarming. He quickly removed his wandering gaze away from the unique, clover-coiffed leaves. Was she that strong? The little knight bounced its closed helmet a few times. The strongest of them all. Actually, he could hear the little fellow doing that thing he does when he questions whether or not it was proper to reveal a secret. He nestled closely. Yes, go on, Suda urged him. Well, you didn't hear this from me, sire. But I was informed there was one other who was considered stronger than our benevolent mother. He whispered the last part. Your secret dies with me, noble knight. He gave a soldier's salute whilst crossing his 2 fingers behind his back. We will see, sire, they say. Ahem. The prince was even stronger than our mother. The prince? Didn't that distrusting feline call me that before? He recalled that large painting against the wall behind those 2 thrones. And what happened between this prince and your mother then? The most devastating tragedy happened, sire. After falling in love and securing the great lands of Candy for our gracious mother, the prince suddenly vanished, without a trace of his existence left behind. Our mother mourned his departure for several moons, and as a result of her wails, it drove her into madness, sire. Such a terrible tragedy indeed. Suda listened silently, focusing on any piece of information about these 2 rulers of this mystique land. Did you ever meet this prince? What was he like? He was perfect, so kind and so graceful. We've all met him, we, the inhabitants of Candy, sire. I can't quite tell you when, but we all remember his song. It's the song of the most perfect dawn, to which our sins were turned into golden memories, and thus we were made anew. This entire tale sounded completely unusual, but that wasn't out of place considering where he was right now. What Suda was hoping to get out of all of this was a clear understanding of who the rulers of this world were, and why both he and Demoria held this strange resemblance to the high populace of this place. Well, at least to these animals. This song you remember hearing. Care to share how it goes? Mahim? I can't really remember, sire, but I do recall a single line from it. All hail Abra, chosen son of the dawn, unblemished prince, whose love shrills the darkest hearts of all. All hail Abra, the benevolent one of all, the prince, the mother, and this lineage of dawn business, sigh. One step at a time, Suda, one step at a time. 2 miles further east, Suda and his tiny knight companion reached a slightly elevated hill overlooking a vast, endless sea. Not far from where they stood, a beautiful, green, shallow brook shimmered beneath the cloudless sky. White, narrow shoals of land separated the tranquil lagoon from the dark blue waters of the open sea. Beyond the lagoon, Suda's gaze was drawn to a distant island, its landscape rising into the sky, adorned with a vibrant crowd of violet and amber trees. As he narrowed his eyes to get a better look, Suda was met with a harrowing sight. At first, he wasn't quite sure if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but upon closer inspection, he was almost certain he could see a number of large silhouettes roaming the skies above this island. Their wingspans were wide and misshapen, reminiscent of crude reptilian creatures. Strangely, their bodies seemed almost human in proportion, with irregular, long feet pointing downwards. Swallowing harshly, Suda gave his little companion an uneasy look before slowly lifting his finger towards the island. What are those things over there? The tiny knight replied. Those are the cold creature's minions, sire. They are horrid pests whom you should try to avoid at all costs. But more importantly, you never want to be caught around their nests during an eclipse. In fact, sire, you don't want to be outside at all during such times. Which reminds me, we should make haste to complete this quest and return to the castle. The diminutive knight punctuated his statement with a small salute. Ah, so he's taking this journey as a small quest. How noble and adorable, Suda thought to himself, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. However, his brows quickly furrowed as he processed the knight's words. Cold creatures? He could only frown upon hearing such a name, silently admonishing the increasing frequency of dangerous-sounding names appearing around him. It's only a matter of time until something unusual appears, Suda mused depressingly to himself, almost certain of the inevitability. This realization prompted him to question his eagerness to explore the outside world in the first place. Maybe it's within my nature? He pondered, recalling his unnatural thirst for high adrenaline sports back in his own world. No, 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 I shouldn't entertain that thought. Usually, when someone starts thinking about that kind of stuff, that's when Suda's musings were abruptly interrupted by a screeching whine piercing the peaceful skies. His heart plummeted and his eyes shot towards the empty air in fright. Finding nothing but the discolored gray skies above, he lowered his gaze. Moments later, the snarling screech sounded even louder, seemingly originating from the air itself again. Tossing his frantic stare towards the heavens, Suda still found nothing but the empty expanse. But where is it? I can't. Sire, get down, the tiny knight shouted urgently. Without a second thought, Suda dove straight towards the ground, his heart almost falling into his stomach as he felt a sharp wind agonizingly carving the space where his head had been moments before. A surge of wind tore over him, the gale moving so quickly that Suda initially thought something had burned the skin off his back. He ended up skidding harshly on all fours, the pain biting into his palms. But the adrenaline kept his mind poised. Suda spun around hastily to get a better look at the assailant. The moment he beheld the creature behind him, his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. What the hell is that? With a look of horror plastered against his face, Suda tried to make sense of what he was seeing right now. A slender, ghoulish creature dressed in ragged black and worn white wrappings stood clearly in his view. The ghoul's head was longer than a normal human's, with most of its face covered in thick, pale wrappings, starkly reminding Suda of a mummy. Between the uneven gaps, he could see bits of the creature's grayish-black skin underneath. That's not human. But how did it? The long face stretched its maw obscenely wide, revealing rows of jagged, discolored teeth. Suda felt his skin crawl the more he observed the horrific-looking being. This was the very first time he had encountered such a noticeable threat. He could feel a real sense of looming danger just from staring at the nightmarish creature. By instinct, he found his feet retreating. But before he could say another word, he heard the sound of iron and the equally surprising scene of the tiny fellow placing itself between him and the strange creature. Sire, SDSD stay back. IW won't be long. Despite likely being the least believable words Suda could remember hearing, the short fellow didn't seem scared, and its next action would trump Suda's previous shock. It held out its little arm, and in a few moments, a conjuring of fragmented cyan shards gathered and formed into a long silver lance. Noticeably, the lance itself looked incredibly long and weighted, stirring a mixture of deep wonder within Suda as he couldn't work out how in the world that tiny fellow could even manage to carry something of that size. That's completely OP. No? To answer his startled thoughts, the little fellow angled the disproportionately large lance a little ahead of itself. Suda could have sworn he merely blinked once before seeing the tiny figure vanishing from its earlier spot, only to reappear right in front of the creature. The ghoulish fiend made a low snarl and raised one of its bony black arms over its head, its entire forearm morphing into a grayish, crude blade before slashing down. The little fellow tossed its arm forward, pushing the already tall lance ahead. Matching both the speed and timing of the thrusted attack, the nightmarish creature slashed downward. Pong! Their attacks met at the same time, causing the overbearing-looking lance to ricochet off what Suda grew troubled to see was an equally sturdy force from the creature itself. The attack slightly pushed them both away a few feet, but the tiny fellow, clearly the nimbler of the two, dashed ahead seconds later. Another bullish gore with its lance bore towards the creature, which seemingly had no time to ready itself for another parry. Instead, its body made a strange movement, almost like a sidestep, but the motion was too strange to accurately follow with his eyes. Missing its mark completely, the little fellow was descending midair when the nightmarish creature swung its arm out, its arm once again morphing into that crudely shaped scythe. Seeing this, Suda felt his heart tighten. He can't dodge that. Damn it. He's in trouble. Despite being able to anticipate the likely outcome, Suda knew he was powerless to do anything about it. Both his instincts and his heightened sense of survival kicked in. At this moment, he could only roar a desperate charge into the air. Hey, Dodge it, Suda heard himself. But he already felt his outcry was too slow to spur a quick enough response. He watched in horror as the crude weapon bore closer to its mark. But at the last possible moment, he noticed the lance suddenly dispersing into those cyan shards once more. This time, however, the shards swiftly gathered between the point of contact and the little fellow. A dazzling silver shield with cyan engravings materialized. Suda could barely contain his relief, almost managing a stiff smile as he watched the shield manage to block the incoming attack. The little fellow landed on his feet and held out his short arm again. The shield turned into cyan shards and formed back into that steel lance. The tiny fellow wasted no time and lunged forward, his attack skimming past the fiend's head, but he managed to withdraw it back quickly enough to avoid the expected counter from the creature. Their movements were a blur of speed and precision. The tiny warrior wielded the oversized lance with unbelievable skill, parrying and thrusting with a grace that belied its size. The nightmarish creature, in turn, morphed its arms into various crude-shaped weapons, with each one of its unpredictable strikes aimed to kill. Sparks flew as the lance clashed against the creature's twisted appendages. The sound of metal against metal echoed a clash of firm together. Suda's heart raced, his eyes wide as he tried to keep up with the furious exchange of blows. Is this really happening? Am I dreaming? But the pain in his palms from his earlier fall, alongside the wind whipping against his face, served as stark reminders that this was no dream. This was his new reality, a world where magic was as real as the ground beneath his feet and the air in his lungs. As the battle raged on, Suda found himself marveling at the little fellow's courage and skill. Despite its diminutive size, it stood its ground against the monstrous creature, never faltering, never wavering. I can't believe this. That little guy is incredible. A wry smile managed to crease against his slightly paled mask. The clash of weapons intensified, and the pace of the battle reached a fever pitch. Suda's breath caught in his throat as the lance and the creature's blades met in a shower of sparks, the force of the impact sending both combatants skidding backward. For a moment, they stood facing each other, the little fellow's iron chest heaving, with heavy mumbled breaths escaping through its closed visor. The creature's wrappings fluttered in the breeze. Then, with a roar that sent shivers down Suda's spine, they charged forward once more, ready to continue their deadly dance. Chapter 49, Rotted Lion's Skin PT2. Suda POV. Meeting that supposed deity, the fishbowl head, and being introduced to the floating golden heads and the basics of arcane magic by the goddess herself. One might have thought Suda would have been thoroughly acclimatized by now to this world of mysteries and powers. But of course, as he tended to learn through a myriad of different ways during the course of his turbulent young life, there was always something bizarre and wonderfully strange awaiting him around the corner. I can't even keep up. They're too fast. Suda thought to himself, stuck between a strange sense of marvel and powerlessness. Standing with his eyes wide open and stiffly fighting the urge to blink, Suda watched both the creature and the tiny, iron-covered fellow engaging in a flurry of attacks and evasive maneuvers. The echoes of iron being grated, struck, and poked resounded through the air, intermingling with the hideous sounds of the creature's snarls and low growls. Beside the sudden appearance of danger, Suda was quite surprised that the little iron figure was this formidable. If his heartbeat wasn't currently going haywire, he might have found the briefest of moments to appreciate the iron-helmed fellow. A flash of surprise appeared on his face as the little fellow managed to find an opening and sent a twisting lunge through the left torso of the standing ghoul. The creature cried out in pain, forced back a few steps by the impact of the blow. Suda heard the squelching sounds of its punctured flesh. Black thick slime dribbled down the lance, landing against the ground like poison and corroding the bluegrass. The scene was horrifying to say the least, and Suda instinctively took a few steps away to widen the distance between himself and the duo. "Sire, be behind you." Suda heard the thundering call a second before he felt what he could only describe as a cold chill clinging menacingly to the nape of his neck. With precise, measured movements, he slowly turned around, only to be faced with complete horror. "You've got to be kidding me." Suda's eyes almost fell out of their sockets. A gust of black sand danced around a strange, ghoulish figure, its grotesque, hunched body covered in layers of filthy, dark rags. The sight of its disfigured, black claws made the hair on Suta's neck stand up tall. Then, its oblong-shaped head slowly lifted, and unlike the first creature, Suta could clearly see its face. It held no eyes, but an obsidian-colored, fleshy skin. Its maw crudely opened, flexing rows of brown, sharpened teeth. There's no way I can fight against that thing. What do I do? 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 Suta's mind raced, trapped in a frozen cage of panic. Before Suta had a chance to react, the second creature launched itself at him. A large, black paw fell against him in a flash, the shadow of death looming. Suta's quickly moving mind channeled everything into reacting. Although caught flat-footed, his nerves suddenly spiked to a heightened degree. He leaped to one side, but the paw caught him against his side. A rush of pain and intense, searing heat brushed against one side of his body, the impact sending him tumbling harshly down the steep, earthy hill. His body slammed against the ground with great force, knocking all the air out of his lungs. As he met the softly wet sand and the small trace of the lagoon, he felt the world around him spinning, his hazy vision distorted, as though someone had forcefully shaken his brain. Suta realized that his consciousness was quickly fading. He couldn't let death catch him. Not now. Stay awake. Stay awake. Get up, Suta. Get up. He willed himself to rise, his aching body eventually obeying. The side of his body felt hot, too hot, and he could already picture the terrible wound he must be nursing. Suta could only motion himself into a steady walk, the sounds of the little fellow's fight raging on above the short hill. Between his gasps and the overlapping echoes, he could just about hear the voice of the little fellow calling out to him. Damn it, what's he saying? He's probably telling me to run. SK, fat chance of that happening right now. It's only a matter of time before this body gives up. I almost died. Shit, what the hell are those things? I need to move. If I stop I won't stand up again. He understood he was merely awake off of the adrenaline coursing through his blood, his mind beginning to fracture into strings of different voices. Thankfully, only a single voice trumped the others, the voice of survival. Suta found his feet lightly pressed into the soft sand, the waters shallow around his ankles, slightly lukewarm with a serene, sparkling hue. He had no time to marvel, however. His body moved through the water and the thin strip of sandy land, the incredible dark blue sea sitting on either side. The further he moved away from the hillside, the deeper his legs sunk into the wet sand. Turning around, Suta noticed the second shadow breaking away from the fight on top of the hill, streaking down the hillside and creating a trail of dust in its wake. The tiny iron-wearing fellow couldn't keep two of those things pinned down for long. A cold stone fell into his gut as he watched this. Shit, here it comes. He hadn't managed to make it too far in the first place, but how could he give up now? Suta grit his teeth in a mixture of defiance and frustration. If only I was strong enough. If I was strong, then I wouldn't be in this dash. Shit. He heard the vocal sound of a snarl closing in from behind, the same fear from before gripping him. If that creature caught up to him, then I'm dead. His mouth moved unconsciously. Death wasn't an outcome he was ready for. No, these days, Suta actively refused it. The creature's presence loomed closer, and their faces fell against his turbulent thoughts once more. Demoria? Ringo? SK. I can't die, not now. Not here. Suta could only stagger briskly forward. Forward, forward. Don't turn back. Don't stop. Forward. Move. Damn it, move, move. The shadow was upon him now, his body tensing as he pictured the creature perhaps a few feet away. Suta made a desperate lunge forward, his instincts telling him the creature was moving for the death blow. Shit, it's over. Something cold traveled through his spine, the true fear of dying. Strangely, Suta felt as though he wasn't a stranger to death, vividly recalling the feeling of falling into nothingness at one point. That mind-shattering silence was one of a kind. This time, however, he felt empowered to go against it. A strange, warm surge of energy suddenly swarmed through his entire body, a power he'd felt somewhat before. But where was the question? Then his inner voice spoke to him. Who cares? If this is Suta or that damn fishbowl head's doing, just save me. He stretched out his hand and pulled at the empty air, his vision blurring and colors disjointing. But Suda saw it, the tear against the empty air, followed by a noticeably sized, shimmering fissure appearing. It grew wider as he fell forward. Before darkness finally enveloped him, Suda fell through the portal he had ripped into existence. Chapter 50, Forest of Blues and Fairies. Suda POV. Hey, did you see that? Shoo, stop nudging me. Of course I did. Something fell from the sky. Should we get the chief? Heavens, no way. We'll get blamed for this somehow. Let's keep this a secret. Gasps. You want us to lie? Oh, forgive this fool. Oh, great mother of the stars. Hey, I'm not saying that. But let's just keep this to ourselves. What is he, anyway? Beats me. Kinda looks like, Dole. Do you remember that statue? You mean that pretty-looking prince on wait, what is? Oh no, look, I think he's waking up. Crap, let's hide quickly. As the foggy haze gently lifted away from Suda's gaze, he found himself slowly awakening beneath a distant twilight expanse. His heavy eyelids flickered with wonder until he could finally see clearly again. The world had changed. Now, he beheld a stitch of stars where countless glittering stars danced in unison. The last time Suda could recall seeing this many stars was back in his old world. Beautiful, he thought to himself. For a few moments, everything felt beautiful at this moment. The fog of confusion still clung to his mind, but Suda was very slowly regaining a small sense of peaceful clarity again, one which spurred a single thought, managing to surface. Am I back home? He frailly mouthed aloud. Memories suddenly filtered back into his groggy thoughts. He heard the faint trace of a snarling echo again, haunting him. Suda jolted upright into a seated position with haste, only to discover an incredible amount of pain latching against his side. Grah! He cried bitterly before keeling over to his good side, tears welling against his gaze. The pain was excruciating, leaving him to wonder what kind of deity he had ever offended to deserve something like this. What kind of pain is this? With his fist tightly clenched, he beat his hand roughly against the crunchy ground until he felt the pain slowly elevating. 20 minutes later, phew, he finally felt relaxed enough to slowly return to his seated position. He couldn't stop the wincing from the biting pain, but it was a lot better than what he had felt a few moments ago. Okay, here goes nothing. Fear grappled his nerves as he finally dared to observe the object of this great distress. Suda traced down his tattered clothes, visibly shocked to see misshapen, gaping claw marks forcefully torn into the fabric, which was also noticeably lined with fetters that showed evidence of burns. Why does it smell quite bad as well? His mind raced as it tried to reframe what had happened before he woke up here. From his desperate lunge over the hill to seeing that shimmering tear within the air. That creature chased me, and then I did something. That thought sent a shiver through his body. Suda held out his palm and summoned his badge again. The usual scene appeared, but he intently focused on his skills section. A sudden gasp broke free from his lips as he tried to make sense of the contents written against his badge. Skill set, glitch, ring 1, cooldown timer, 64 hours 56 minutes and 16 seconds. In no way. Did I tell her? Before his mind could arrive at the startling discovery, Suda heard a rustling noise from the nearby bushes. He suddenly snapped back into reality and tossed his frantic gaze around his surroundings. Where am I now? This place looks like a jungle, but it's suddenly nighttime? With a host of growing concerns, Suda observed the crowded, leafy trees and foliage around him, all covered in a nightingale shroud of blue with golden veins drawn across the surface of the leaves. Despite the splendorous beauty, he refused to bask in it at this moment, sensing he wasn't alone. He sat as still as a log, waiting, his eyes peering with intent towards one space in particular. He could hear them, despite not clearly seeing them. The bushes wouldn't stop moving, and every few moments, he was assured he saw what looked like a very tiny wing poking out from behind a leaf. His brows narrowed, and then he slowly parted his mouth. I know you're there. Come out. The rustling stirred a little more, followed by very delicate whispers and a sudden loud yelp shooting into the air. He saw a small sprite tumble out into the open, rolling a little towards him before landing firmly against its backside. Suda was taken aback at the sight. He looked visibly stunned as he observed the incredibly pocket-sized figure sitting on the ground with its two legs sprawled apart. It was a boy from what he could tell, with large, clear azure eyes, a tuft of green hair, and pointed, sharpened ears. Suda heard the flutter before he caught sight of the bizarre pair of clear wings attached to the sprite's back. The little sprite seemed disoriented, rubbing its eyes a little and looking around absent-mindedly before finally tracing its stare towards Suda's own. He slightly turned his head to one side as the sprite lightly gasped upon seeing him. "What in the world is that?" he thought bizarrely, keeping a constant look of intrigue upon the little fairy. For a few silent moments, both he and the very whimsical-looking little person merely stared at one another. Suddenly, a memory resurfaced concerning a particular mythical race of creatures with tiny wings. "Wait, is that a F-fairy?" His voice sounded louder than he intended. "Gasp!" sounded from the little thing before it hastily scooped itself up and flew back into the bushes with the quickness of a firefly. After the rustling disturbance within the bushes faded, Suda could hear incessant whispers growing louder from within the underbrush. Curiously, he decided to cautiously approach the tussle and noise, crawling towards the bushes one palm at a time. With each fragile movement, he felt a biting pain against his side. "Goor, damn it, why does it hurt so much? Was I poisoned?" The thought crossed his mind on more than one occasion, but he simply didn't want to face the implications of that, considering he had no idea where he was right now. Why did you push me for? I didn't do anything. It was him. Liar. Swear it on the mother of moons. Puffed. You see, only guilty people make others swear. But you're all right, aren't you? What is it like? Is he a monster? I don't think so. I think he's hurt himself. Not surprising, going around throwing all that gigantic weight around. We're lucky he didn't fall on us. Hey, keep quiet, you two. What if he can hear us? He can't hear us. He's too big. Wah, shouldn't he be able to hear us more? Ah, Sister Ruoa said the bigger you are, the smaller your ears. Suda had managed to get close without the strange, whispering bunch noticing his presence. He gently parted aside a small fold of cover between the bushes to gain a better look, his eyes flashing with genuine surprise at what he found. "Well, what do we have here?" Peering his eyes a little closer, Suda discovered three tiny little sprites seated in a circle against a small clearing between the shrubbery. One was the green-haired sprite he had seen earlier, joined by other intriguing, whimsically-looking fellows. One donned dark purple hair, seated with his arms cradling his knees, while the other carried a reddish-brown hair braided into one long braid. Between the trio, that fellow, in particular, looked to be the haughty one, holding his tiny arms crossed and looking rather adorable with his cheeks puffed and large, round eyes glittering a radiant amber glow. I'm not scared of any monster. I'm going to be chief one day, so let me take care of that strange giant. Is that the leader, then? Suda couldn't help musing playfully as he observed the interactions between these strange little things he was almost certain were fairies of some kind. Watching them attempt to whisper between themselves was entertaining. Fairies, huh? Can't say I'm surprised with how things have turned out so far, but it's still somewhat surprising, Suda thought to himself, by this point almost unconsciously propping his chin against his palm. "I think we should tell Sister Ruoa," said the shy-looking one with green hair. "It might be for the best." Uffed. Don't be such scaredy cats. Besides, why is it suddenly so dark? The little figure raised its tiny head, its spirited look swiftly changing into one of deep horror as it beheld the looming Suta above. Suda himself had obliviously forgotten that his presence conjured a looming shadow over the tiny gathering, and he seemed to have only caught on the moment the three wide, animated eyes locked onto him. "Oh crap," Suda thought, wincing. Hello there," he greeted a little nervously. A penetrating silence ensued for a short while, but soon afterward, the expected theatrics suddenly erupted. "By the goddess, our run. Someone save us." Suda winced a little, comforting one of his ears from the unexpected high-pitched squealing they were making. In the midst of his slight discomfort, two of the tiny fairies quickly banded behind the one with the reddish ponytail. What do you guys think you're doing? It's the monster. You said you'll see care of it. Go on then. The standing fairy swallowed harshly, taking a second look at Suda with deep concern glazed across its rattling gaze. Suta could guess the little fellow was torn between running away and feebly standing to its earlier word. Fufu, I don't want to give them much trouble. Tiske, ouch. Plus I really need some help with this wound. Aren't fairies supposed to be magical and whatnot? Perhaps I can. An intriguing thought swelled within his thoughts, spurred on by the numbing pain coursing against his side. He had already held some form of experience with the strange inhabitants of this world, so he decided on a different approach compared to the one he showed the talking lion and that crow. Speaking of which, I hope Demoria's all right on her own around those idiots. Being lost together was one thing, but being separated across an unknown plane was an entirely different matter. And Suda understood his number one goal was to now find his way back to Demoria. He slowly peeled his head away from the little clearing and held up one of his hands in a gentle manner. PL pleasure to be of acquaintance. My name is Ahim. You can call me Suda. I am a humano, of course, aha. Be you, but what are you guys? Are you fairies? Or is that rude of me? Apologies if so. I'm not sure what to say next. Suda scratched the side of his head awkwardly as he muttered that final sentence, his gaze softening as he anxiously awaited their response. They didn't say anything right away, but he eventually noticed the two little heads gently poking out from the side, their eyes clearly filled with caution as they stole subtle looks at him. Jet, what is it saying? Is it going to eat us? I don't think. Solely listen. I'm going to try something. The fairy with the red braid said, taking a deep breath before placing a single step towards Suda. The tiny fairy started to cautiously advance one little step at a time. Are you crazy? Look at the size of those fangs. Fangs? What fangs? Are they talking about my teeth? Good heavens! Did I change into another body again? Suda thought frantically in alarm, prodding his canines to make sure he hadn't transmigrated again into something more sinister. Meanwhile, he could hear the soft flutter of tiny wings flapping incessantly, stirring a delicately unique, twinkling sound into his ears. Suda remained as still as he possibly could be, watching what he was certain was an actual fairy, slowly hovering towards him. Now that he held a better look at the tiny mythical being, he could see the style of clothes they wore. The simple clothes reminded him of what people who lived in deserts wore, apart from the head coverings. These tiny fellows fitted the description down to the minute detail. Loose pale trousers with silk blazers and sackcloth footwear tied with loose string. Once the red-haired fairy was within touching distance, it stopped, ensuing another awkward silence. Suda cleared his throat, unsure of the best way to communicate with these little fellows. Perhaps they have different customs. But this is getting a little awkward for my liking. Ouch. And this pain is growing worse. He winced again, showing noticeable discomfort. Drawing away a little from the bashful-looking fairy, Suda placed a hand delicately over the burning wound in a bid to inspect the issue. Just the slightest of touches sent a surge of pain crashing throughout his entire body. He could barely remain on all fours and keeled over rather expectantly, trying to refrain from cursing aloud, with low grunts and growls escaping through his gritted teeth. Oh, okay, this is a problem. Ugh. What the heck is happening? Something is wrong. This must be poison. The worst thought had finally surfaced within his mind. Suda tried to pry himself up, but found himself unable to unfold from his prone position. Just my luck. Wait, what's that? From the corner of his lowered gaze, Suda noticed a sparkle of gold glittering around his wounded side. The fairy cautiously buzzed around. What's it doing? He wondered upon seeing the little fairy almost inquisitively inspecting his problem. After spending a somewhat lengthy period around there, it moved out of his sight. Suda gently lifted his body away from the ground to follow it, the pain within his body protesting every step of the way. But he managed to raise his head up at least. The other two fairies had now ascended and joined the first one. Currently, they all remained eye level with him, all carrying a very cautious and somewhat glazed look of terror. Luckily, Suda could understand these strange little creatures meant him no harm. It could have been worse.
Guess.
He exhaled a relaxed breath and tried to angle himself into a more comfortable seated position, making sure the side of his wound was facing them. As expected, he noticed the trio moving closer to the side he presented to them. They all zoned in towards him. Being so close it felt slightly weird feeling their little breaths, muttering so close to his charred skin. See, look, that's lion skin's rot. I almost didn't believe it when I first saw it. He heard one of them say. Erg. It smells horrible. Vest. Is this one of the incurable curses they taught us about? Asked the childish-looking green-haired fairy. Yes, yes, I believe so, replied the purple-haired one, who was slightly chubbier and, amusingly, was placing on very round, delicately sized bamboo-framed glasses. Suda was sure there weren't any lenses inside of them. How strange. Lion skin rot shouldn't exist around these parts. Why's that? Well, to put it simply, said the chubbier fairy, taking off its frames in a casual manner, they should have all been dead by now. The moment he spoke those words, the three whimsically-eyed fairies sharply turned to face Suda. He could only crease a wry smile in response. Don't look at me. I have no idea what any of this means, he pondered to himself, reminiscing the mysterious turn of events which seemed forever tethered to his heels at this point. Not to mention that skill of mine, eldritch? He gulped harshly, reminded that the notion of teleportation seemed so absurd he was torn between excitement and sheer horror if this was true. If I think about it, somehow it kind of makes sense. But then, without knowing how this power works, does that mean I'm essentially jumping between worlds? Whilst he played with the pros and cons of perhaps possessing something that felt way too powerful for someone as oblivious as he was to wield, the three fairies ascended closer towards his face. The little trio seemed to have gotten slightly braver. Suda creased a painfully helpless smile. He noticed the one placed in the middle with the long braid scrutinizing him with its large, bright amber eyes. SSO. Huh. Looks like you desire our help? GG good, that's good. Ahem. So then, yo. You have to obey us. Alright. We're in charge here. It stammered in a rather stern and yet troubled manner at the same time, creasing a slightly ugly smile in the process. Suda tried his best to hold in even the slightest of smiles. He wanted them to believe he posed no harm at all. His reasoning was simple. Based on his past experiences with people or fellows who might come across as weaker than he, it made his life easier when he was underestimated or downright treated like an idiot. He decided to raise the arm on his good side upright, feigning ignorance as he presented the fairies with a helpless look of sadness. Oh, of course, I am a completely helpless fellow, lost in a strange world who only wants to find his way back home again. Oh, noble and valiant ones, may I ask for your humble graces to help me? What they didn't see was his hands placed behind his back, secretly crossing his fingers. Chapter 51. Deep in the forest. The Accursed One? Suda POV. He opened one of his eyes to see the fruits of his slightly devious act. Firstly, he was surprised it had worked as well as he had hoped. All three of them were now carrying beet-red cheeks of embarrassment. The fairy with the red braid even looked as though he was fighting back every fiber against his face, trying to form a smile. Excellent, Suda mused inwardly, watching as the trio formed a small huddle with their backs turned towards him. Yet again, they attempted but failed to mask their whispers. What should we do now? I'm not sure. He's quite flattering, isn't he? I think so. I think he could be our friend. Quiet, the both of you. He might hear us. The three turned their heads around to face Suda in unison before turning back again. You see, he seems nice. Puffed. It's all a ploy. I know his kind. You do? WWL. What is he then? I don't. Listen, forget about that. This is what we do. We treat him like our slave, and that way, he can help us. I dunno. What if we get into more trouble? He has a point, Jet. The chief might scold us if we Don't be such scaredy cats. Trust me, I'm an expert on this. Ahem. We make him listen to us, and then he can help us with dealing with those pesky fruit bats who stole all our delicious peaches. Hold on. He turned around again towards Suda, who could only stare absent-mindedly at the little guy who was obviously struggling to work out the sort of face to show him. Suda couldn't help but find amusement in the little fairy's antics. It was clear that Jet, as the others called him, was trying his best to assert some form of authority over the situation. However, his nervousness and lack of experience in dealing with such matters were quite evident. Well, what do we have here? A little fairy trying to play the big boss? Suda thought to himself, suppressing a chuckle. He decided to play along with Jet's little scheme, curious to see where it would lead. Plus, he figured that cooperating with these fairies might be his best chance at getting some much-needed help for his injury. So, what is it that you require of me, O mighty ones? Suda asked, putting on his best subservient tone. Jet puffed out his chest, trying to appear more imposing than his tiny stature allowed. Why you? You will help us deal with those pesky fruit bats. They've been stealing our precious peaches, and we need someone of your size to teach them a lesson. The other two fairies exchanged uncertain glances, clearly not entirely on board with Jet's plan. Are you sure about this, Jet? I mean, he's injured, and we don't even know if he's capable of— Silence, Jet interrupted, shooting a glare at his companion. I know what I'm doing. Now you. He pointed at Suda. Do you agree to help us in exchange for our assistance with your injury? Suda nodded solemnly, doing his best to keep a straight face. The trio all nodded in unison before turning around to face him again. He quickly noticed that two of the fairies beheld him with much kinder eyes, leaving the haughty-looking one with the braid who still tried to maintain that air of seriousness. It's hard to be scared of such adorable tiny things, mind you. He chuckled to himself, mistakenly a little too hard, thus igniting that shooting pain down his side once again. Arg, damn it, he growled, feeling the pain only worsen and very nearly stealing his consciousness away. Oh no, he's hurt, one of the fairies exclaimed. Quick, Jet, do something, the other urged. What am I supposed to do? We can't cure such curses. Although, there is someone but, Jet stammered, his face growing pale. What is it? Is it the chief? The green-haired fairy asked, with concern etched on his face. And no, not the chief. We shouldn't, but I think he's the only one, Jet replied, his voice trembling. Who is it? The chubby fairy inquired, adjusting his bamboo frames nervously. Who else but the sea cursed one, Jet finally blurted out, causing the other two fairies to gasp in shock. Suda, despite his pain, couldn't help but be intrigued by this new development. The cursed one? Now, that sounds interesting, he thought to himself, trying to focus on something other than the searing pain in his side. The fairies huddled together once more, their whispers even more frantic than before. The cursed one? Are you insane, Jet? We can't go to him, the green-haired fairy hissed. But he's the only one who might know how to cure this kind of curse. We can't just let him die, Jet argued, gesturing towards Suda. I don't know. What if the cursed one doesn't want to help? What if he curses us too? The chubby fairy whimpered, his eyes wide with fear. Jet took a deep breath, seemingly trying to muster up his courage. We have to try. It's our only option. Besides, if we help this giant, he'll be indebted to us. Think of what we could accomplish with him on our side. The other two fairies shared uncertain looks with one another, weighing the risks and benefits of Jet's proposal. Meanwhile, Suda watched the exchange with growing curiosity and a hint of apprehension. The cursed one? Huh? Sounds like someone I should probably avoid. But then again, if he can help relieve me of this pain— As the pain continued to throb against his side, Suda realized that he might not have much of a choice in the matter. If this cursed individual was his only hope for survival, he would have to take the risk. Well, I suppose I've faced worse than a cursed fairy. I hope, he mused silently, bracing himself for whatever lay ahead. The fairies finally broke their huddle, turning to face Suda with a mixture of determination and trepidation in their eyes. All right, giant, Jet declared, his voice still shaking slightly. We've decided to take you to the cursed one, but you have to promise to help us with the fruit bats once you're healed. Got it? The crunchy ground crackled beneath his soles as Suda followed the fairies along the narrow, slightly eerie path. The swash of deep blue mixed with the tones of the twilight sky created an ethereal ambience, so beautiful that one might find themselves lost in the simple splendors of this majestic blue forest. As forests go, Suda had this one down as the coolest he had been lucky enough to see thus far. A unique air of wanderlust settled around him. A true mythical space filled with both the wonderful and the intriguingly weird. Glowing flowers bloomed against the pockets of dense foliage, and colorful flying bugs changing colors based on their mood. One of his favorites, though, had to be the old oaks with horrid faces. Most of them were frozen masks against the firm barks, but he did pass by a few that surprisingly mumbled something as he passed. A familiar verse he had remembered another host of ugly-faced flowers singing to him before. Abra? Abra? Who the hell is this Abra? Ah, well, a matter for another time, I suppose. Suda mused, his mind wandering. Oh, why do I feel so good? Right now, Suda was feeling incredibly good. And no, his poisonous, festered wound hadn't improved a single bit. In fact, he was almost certain it was getting worse with every passing second. But thanks to the little fairies, who had somehow sprinkled this incredibly potent golden dust over his wound, Suda felt 10 times better. So much so that he could easily walk, skip, and hop as though nothing was wrong with him in the first place. Although the chubbier fairy had warned him about the drawbacks of this method of quelling his pain for now, Suda felt like he was on cloud 9. He did suspect he might have been given some sort of hallucinogenic substance, but for now, it achieved what it said on the tin. His pain had completely been taken away. Is this what they call fairy magic? Fufufu. How convenient. I wonder if I can coerce one of them into following me around from now on. They might probably refuse, but perhaps I just need to be a little persuasive. I could bring one back for Demoria. Hee hee. She would be so surprised when she met one, Suda thought, lost in a euphoric dream. He couldn't get over this intense feeling of euphoria. The air was heavenly, enriched with a unique splendor that felt life-giving. The dance of the majestic stars above only fueled the ethereal ambience. By the time they crossed halfway along the thinly crunchy path sleeked through the forest, most of the atmosphere had gone through a series of changes before his glittering eyes. The oak trees with howling faces were soon left behind, and the landscape changed into flatter and clearer earth, where an array of colorful feathered animals appeared in the fold. Suda marveled at the wondrous sights around him, his mind drifting between the present and thoughts of his companion, Demoria. He couldn't wait to share these incredible experiences with her, hoping that she, too, would be as enchanted by this magical world as he was. Suda walked past a class of beautifully arrayed flamingos dressed in violet and lush blue feathers with mango-colored beaks. He also caught the brief sight of exotic-looking white-furred tigers with enchanting azure irises, cautiously observing Suda through the thin shrubbery. Thankfully, these creatures weren't hostile. With the little fairies leading the way, Suda trailed behind them, rather enjoying the scenery and the euphoric feeling spiriting his every step. Now and again, he noticed the little fairies ahead stealing subtle glances at him. He found the childish-looking one with green hair was the most likely to befriend him. On more than one occasion, Suda caught the little fairy waving to him before being swiftly scolded by the one with the red braid. But the little fairy didn't let up and would occasionally crease a smile. Time passed on, and Suda found himself standing on a sloping mountainside, snaked around an incredibly giant tree with long, twisting branches reaching towards the stars. As they ascended along the stony path, Suda could see the almost endless outlay of this enchanting blue forest layered before him. The carpet of deep blue seemed to flow like waves from an endless sea. Mesmerized by its captivating surrealism, he found his feet planted against the stones, unable to peel his gaze away from such a scene. A single word appeared through Suda's shaking smile. Be beautiful. He meant that in the truest sense of the word. The soft, moving winds gently brushed past his body. Suda softly closed his eyelids, allowing himself to drink in the richness of the soothing air. His serene calm was momentarily disturbed by the slight, high-pitched voices from those fairies ahead. Suda lazily opened a single eye. Jet, are we sure about this? One of the fairies asked. No, but what choice do we have? I don't think there's anything the tribes can do for him, Jet replied. It's true. Lion's rot poison is far beyond even our capabilities. I even fear once the effects wear off, might dash, the chubby fairy stammered, scared to complete the sentence. Let's not dwell on the bad things. We're almost there. Hopefully, he's in a good mood today, Jet said, trying to sound reassuring. Hearing the remnants of their conversation, curiosity bloomed a host of questions out into the open. So then, tell me about this accursed person we're visiting. You said he can cure me, yes? Suda asked, his spirited voice causing the trio to shiver a little. The green-haired fairy turned rose-pink again whilst creasing a childish smile and a faint head nod. The chubbier fairy was still slightly scared, while the other haughty one remained indifferently cautious. Why, yes. He arrived here some time ago. The chief ordered him to stay on the outskirts of our village, just in case. He was dangerous. The little fellow's brow narrowed out of fear. And is he dangerous? Suda asked as he walked beside the trio. The green-haired fairy hovered around his face, sniffing and gently touching his bright pink locks, before gently finding a seat against his shoulder. Suda didn't mind it. He was still trying to work out if he was being led towards another disaster. Why, yes, very dangerous. Ahem, but he's not so bad. He's helped the tribes with fortifications and taught us a little bit about his world. Oh, and he allows us to pet his fluffy companion. He just looks dangerous. He's not so bad, the red-braided fairy explained, its pointed ears twitching a little, the tips turning red. Is it getting embarrassed? Suda noticed its reserved mannerisms. A twinkle beside his left ear sounded, followed by a childish voice. Hey, mister, you're not dangerous, are you? A warm smirk creased against Suda's face in response. Absolutely not. I'm the most friendly giant you'll ever meet. The green-haired fairy chuckled childishly, having found itself perched atop Suda's shoulder, using one of the many braided locks cascading down his helm as support. Good then. As they continued their journey towards the accursed one's dwelling, Suda couldn't help but wonder what kind of being this mysterious individual might be. Dangerous and yet helpful? A fluffy companion? It all sounded quite intriguing, and despite the potential risks, Suda found himself eagerly anticipating their encounter a little more than he should do. Well, I suppose I'll find out soon enough, he mused silently, a mixture of excitement and apprehension swirling within him. With the green-haired fairy happily perched on his shoulder and the other two leading the way, Suda pressed on, ready to face whatever challenges and surprises lay ahead. Chapter 52. Deep in the forest. What howls beneath the golden moon? Suda POV. The air felt thinner the closer they made their way up the winding footpath leading to the summit. Upon their arrival, Suda found it strange that another small forest suddenly bloomed around them. Scaling his eyes towards the starry heavens, he only just realized they were halfway along this behemoth-sized oak tree covered with heavy blue leaves. This strange forest floor layered beneath his feet had also caught his attention. Unlike the crunchy ground he had encountered below, beneath his feet lay a carpet of evenly matted soft bluegrass. The fairies had also noticeably shortened their distance towards him. Suda could already tell something about this place was bothering the little guys. Sigh, I guess there's another unexpected problem awaiting me then, isn't there? He thought to himself. Inwardly, Suda was already bracing himself for the next unexpected problem. Just as he conjured the worst possible case scenario, he first noticed the three fairies had stopped advancing. Besides the twinkle of their thin wings, they were strangely quiet. What are they looking at now? He wondered, following their gazes and drawing his attention towards a peculiar shadow presented against the side of the giant tree ahead. Suda squinted his eyes, unsure of what he was looking at. The shadow seemed to be moving ever so slightly as if it were alive. It was an unsettling sight to say the least, and the fairy's strange reaction only added to the growing sense of unease. Is that the accursed one? Suda asked, his voice barely above a whisper, unable to remove his gaze away from the odd ghostly shadow. The red-braided fairy nodded, its tiny body trembling. Why, yes, that's him. He's always sitting there, watching, waiting for what? Suda inquired, a chill running down his spine. And no one knows, the chubby fairy replied this time, adjusting its bamboo frames with shaking hands. Some say he's waiting for someone to break his curse. Others say he's waiting for the right moment to strike. The green-haired fairy huddled closer to Suda's neck, seeking comfort in his presence. I don't like this. Maybe we should go back? Suda took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. No, We've come too far to turn back now. If this accursed one can cure me, then I have to take the chance. With a gentle motion, he plucked the green-haired fairy from his shoulder and held it against the air, waiting for its tiny wings to flutter into life. You three stay here. I don't want you getting caught in the middle of this if things go wrong. The fairies exchanged worried glances, but nodded in agreement. Be careful, mister, the green-haired fairy whispered, its large eyes brimming with concern. Suda gave them a reassuring smile before turning to face the shadowy figure. With cautious steps, he began to approach the accursed one, his heart pounding in his chest. Suta tilted his helm to one side, observing the strange, shadowy substance slowly unearthing itself away from the rigid bark. It was slender, with a strange, impish appearance from afar. Or was it draconian? Around 100 or so feet away, he decided to steady his walk. Despite the heightened euphoric feeling surging through his body because of the fairies sprinkling that strange golden dust against his wound, Suda could feel the need to remain incredibly cautious at this point. Why do I feel weary? Is this feeling? It was hard for him to properly understand it, but to Suda it felt as though he had voluntarily walked into the den of a terrible predator with an aura so oppressive his very being rejected being here. Suda could sense a lingering sensation of dread slowly crawling up his spine. He narrowed his gaze towards the oak with a growing sense of fear approaching. Two sparkling gems of red flashed from the hazy shadow before Suda could process the frightening sight. A silvery mist stirred, and an outline of a slenderly tall figure removed itself away from the oak. Fear gripped Suda as he felt that euphoric high draining away from his bones in seconds. He took a step away but found his body anchored to the ground like lead. A hiss of pain grimaced as that familiar sharp pain ran through his side once again. The fairy's powers had worn off. Shit, the feeling is coming back. But what kind of crazy sensation is this? A self-mocking smile creased against his face, watching this strange shadowy figure unearthing itself into the twilight. Suda couldn't pinpoint ever feeling such dread approaching him, not even from the fishbowl head. The silvery shadow was a very slenderly tall man. His skin was a grayish pale, bony and slightly chiseled with a defined and almost sculpted torso on show. The cascade of bright blonde falling past his stomach was as straight as silk. He wore dark trousers but was barefoot. Suda first saw his snow-white feet stepping into the twilight, and the first step he took sent a baleful wind moving past him. Suda immediately felt cold sweat pouring down the side of his face. His eyes flashed wide out of surprise. See, come on now. What kind of pressure is that? The slender fellow was around 7 feet tall. He walked with a slightly hunched form. His two long arms loosely drooped forward. Suda tried to remain poised, but every fiber within his body was screaming out to him to flee at once. Shit, I can't move a single inch. Who is this? The slender figure stopped its ghoulish movements. Its slenderly long neck craned back. Suda watched with feverish anticipation as the figure finally revealed the face hidden beneath its sunken head. Sucking in large mouthfuls of air, a clear mist rose away from its loud exhale. A handsome and unblemished pale face beheld him, but it was its expressionless crimson eyes that sent waves of chill through his body. Once its lips parted, Suda suddenly gasped as a rogue wind swept through him. He merely blinked and found the towering fellow standing right in front of him. He had an arm placed around his shoulder, his body bent slightly so his head rested between the space over his shoulders. Suda's eyes opened wide, his heart falling into his stomach. Fear. This was the true sense of fear. So fast. He couldn't even begin to fathom how quick that movement was. At that moment, Suda surrendered himself to whatever power was before him right now. One false move, and he understood it would spell his end. The accursed one's presence was overwhelming, a suffocating aura that threatened to consume Suda whole. As he stood there, frozen in place, he could only wonder what fate awaited him at the hands of this enigmatic and terrifying being. Is this the end for me? He thought, his mind racing with a myriad of possibilities, each more dreadful than the last. Yet, beneath the fear and the dread, a small glimmer of hope still flickered within Suda's heart. If this accursed one truly held the power to cure him, then perhaps there was a chance, however slim, that he might survive this encounter. I still remember the smell of those born from the mercy of dawn. A watery and surprisingly gentle voice crept into his ears. Suda's gaze remained a stiffened mask of shock. He feared that even moving a single muscle might bring about unexpected trouble. He could hear this fellow sniffing around him, his touch softly landing against his shoulders. Fingertips as cold as ice delicately brushed him, causing him to shiver a little. He remained still as ice, gritting his teeth beneath this oppressive aura that almost suffocated him. Does it bother you? My intent. If so, then perhaps you should fall to your knees. A sharp screech sounded in the air, followed by an overwhelming force suddenly descending upon Suda's standing body. His eyes were left bulging wide as his knees buckled and his shoulders dropped. Suda crashed towards the ground before he found himself pinned to the soft grass, his eyes level with the pure snow-white feet of this fellow. A single thought managed to surface amongst the chaos around him. Strong, too strong. This fellow was the strongest being he had met so far. Despite the opposing force pinning him forcefully down, there was a growing wave of defiance slowly festering in the darkness. Suda grit his teeth, slowly attempting to peel himself off the ground. His entire bones rattled and creaked, blood eventually trickling down the side of his mouth. Die? No, I can't die. Grrrr, yet. With every ounce of defiance, he felt the oppressive force willing him closer to the ground even more. Sounds of static popped and rattled, filling the air with an eerie, unnatural noise. Suda's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out of this predicament. He knew he was no match for the Accursed One in terms of raw power, but perhaps there was another way to survive this encounter. Think, Suda, think. There has to be something, anything. In the midst of the overwhelming disaster, the cogs started to rapidly turn. His mind, which he prized so much, had always bailed him out of tough situations. As he struggled against the overwhelming pressure, a sudden realization struck him. The fairies had mentioned that this Accursed One had helped their tribes in the past, teaching them about his world. Perhaps, if he could appeal to that side of the mysterious being, he might stand a chance. With great effort, Suda managed to lift his head just enough to meet the Accursed One's crimson gaze towering coldly from above. Please, he gasped, his voice strained and barely audible. I come, seeking your help. The fairies. They said you might be able to cure me. The Accursed One tilted his head, his expressionless face betraying no emotion. Cure you? And why should I do that? What value does your life hold to me? Suda swallowed hard, his mind racing to find the right words. I can offer you no knowledge of my world. Just as you have shared with the fairies, I am a traveler, one who has seen many strange and wondrous things. For a moment, the Accursed One remained silent, his crimson eyes boring into Suda's soul. Then, slowly, the oppressive force began to lift, allowing Suda to take a shaky breath. Very well, the Accursed One said, his voice a cold whisper. I will hear what you have to say, but know this, traveler. If your words do not satisfy me, your life will be forfeit. Suda exhaled, a glimmer of hope sparking within him. It was a chance, however slim, and he was determined to make the most of it. All right, Suda, time to put that silver tongue of yours to the test. Your life depends on it. With a deep breath, he began to speak, weaving tales of his adventures and the wonders he had witnessed, all the while praying that his words would be enough to save him from the Accursed One's wrath. Chapter 53, Ser Anak the Steward. Suda POV. Suda omitted a lot of the things he went through. Of course, one of those being his meeting with the fishbowl head, those deathly oaths he swore upon as a result, his subsequent death, and of course, the fact that he was actually from another world, transmigrated into someone else's body. But everything else he was glad to talk about. Depressingly enough, though, it didn't seem as though anything he revealed proved to move this crimson-eyed figure one single bit. Ever since his dramatic narration began, that cold, deadpan face only grew more mirthless. Damn it. What's his problem? Does he think I'm lying? Growing panic started to fester. He could feel his fingertips turning clammy, whilst his throat felt dry. Those penetrating ruby eyes beheld him with such coldness within them, so much so Suda could barely get his words free from his mouth. And just when he felt all hope slipping away from his control, a little voice erupted into the frigid air. SS Ser Anak. Peel, please spare him. Suda moved his gaze towards the childish voice that sounded behind him. The little guy's entire body was shivering uncontrollably, but his large, clear eyes remained filled with an unwavering resolve. HM? The Fae? So it was you three that brought this one to my domain? Why is that? The watery voice asked the little green-haired fairy in particular. The trio shared looks of concern, undecided between them on who should speak first. BB because, ahem. Forgive us, Ser Anak, but this creature fell, well the flustered fairy stammered, unsure where to place its stare. He fell from the sky, and he's been poisoned. The one with the red-haired braid blurted out. Poisoned? Those cold ruby eyes fell upon him again with a strange light flickering within them. Why, yes, by the lion's rot. A sharp gust of wind whooshed past him, and suddenly Suda felt his body scooping itself off the ground. He felt his equilibrium going haywire, before finding himself dangling against the air like a rag doll. Now the sky was below and the ground was beneath him. The slight problem was noticing he had been hoisted into the air by a single bony, pale arm. Those dreadful predatory ruby eyes locked onto him again. Yet this time, there was an unmissable look of wonder gathered within that pale mask. Heh, finally realized my worth. Did you? Sigh. Well, at least he isn't trying to kill me. TSK, but why do I keep finding myself in these types of situations? These days, he was almost a magnet to these weird and near-death experiences. All he wanted to do was learn arcane. But this world and its mysteries were hellbent on dragging him through the ringer. Anak wore a confused look against his cold mask. He fell from the sky. I see. The slenderly tall fellow moved his crimson gaze towards the fairies. You little ones should report this to your chief. Do not fear. The human is safe with me. Human? Suda's attention was suddenly piqued. He knows what I am. At least. He thought to himself. Era. Are you sure? One of the little fairies bravely asked. Precisely the green-haired little one. Ah, he's sticking up for me, eh? But his chivalry wasn't shared by the others, who quickly rushed to cover his little mouth. Ahem. Forgive us, Ser Anak. If you say the intruder will now be your prisoner, we shan't question your decision. Excuse us. We shall report this to the chief. Damn, selling me out just like that. Suta could only watch on as the trio cautiously took their leave. Despite their haste to leave him, he could see each of their little faces showing muddled emotions whilst they kept turning around to look at him. Eventually, they did fly away, back down the winding stony road. Welp, guess it could be worse. He sighed depressingly. The pale-faced figure then drew his attention towards him. His soothing and rather cold, raspy voice then said, Now then, human who fell from the stars? I assume you are human, yes? Suda gulped harshly. Hearing that voice somehow felt like a shard of ice being lightly grated against the back of his neck. He gently nodded his head in response, feeling slightly nauseous from being suspended upside down like this. No matter which way he chose to spin it, those blood-red eyes were absolutely terrifying to stare into up close. As he hung there, suspended in the air by Ser Anak's otherworldly strength, Suda couldn't help but wonder what secrets this accursed one held. There was an air of mystery surrounding him, a sense that he had seen and experienced things far beyond his comprehension right now. Maybe, just maybe, if I can gain his trust, he might be able to help me in more ways than one. Still lingering in his daydreams, it wasn't until he heard the sudden tones of dark laughter that startled free. So, it is true. I see. Fufuwa. The unexpected and rather unhinged laughter sent chills running down the nape of Suda's neck. Goodness, it wasn't that funny. He grimaced in slight horror, wishing these strange characters could just be normal for once. Good. I have waited an age for this moment. Anak snarled into the twilight air. An age of silence and starvation. Do you know what that feels like, boy? Trapped beneath that dreaded, never-ending golden moon. As Anak spoke these things, Suda noticed those ruby-colored eyes depressingly lifting towards the twilight air above. Due to the way he was being held upright, quite embarrassingly of course, he twisted slightly towards his left side, gazing at the starry skies, His view was upside down, but that still failed to send the deep shock he felt the moment he laid eyes upon the golden object lodged within the twilight. There was a giant golden half-moon, noticeably glittering like runes he could vaguely remember seeing within Granny Baba's books. Why is there a rune? You know of the runes? Fufufu, indeed. You are one of them, aren't you? Anik spoke. Suda's brow twitched a little. After going through slightly similar experiences thus far, he could almost guess what Anik was about to say next. Lineage of Dawn, right? Suda softly spoke, feeling another headache on the way. For the first time, it was him, the one wearing the pale stone face, who showed a look of deep surprise by hearing that leave Suda's mouth. As I thought, Suda sighed to himself. That searing pain against his side wasn't too far behind, dutifully reminding him about his current plight. For Suda, at this point, the pain had gotten so problematic that he could only helplessly cry. However, his discomfort didn't go unnoticed by the cold-faced Anik. The poisonous lion's rotted disease. How peculiar. I thought we felled the last set of those accursed cubs 5 decades ago? Or has it been longer? I tend to forget these days. Perhaps an incantation. Human. Which world have you tumbled out from? Wait, what are you dash? Suda blurted out, trying to piece together the fellow's jumble of words. How do you know about wait? Who exactly are you? That cold, expressionless mask finally showed a subtle look of emotion again. The corners of his pale mouth slightly tugged upwards. Suda observed the defined features of this ominous fellow, almost finding himself lost in those blood-soaked eyes glimmering with intensity. Who am I? Kukuku. Is seeing me not believing enough? Human? Rather, if memory serves me correctly, I believe your people have a rather unique name for my kind. Oh, what was it again? A strange name it was. He himself taught it to me the same way he taught me many other things concerning the distant worlds. Yes, it was that, wasn't it? Vampire he called my kind. The moment those words crept free from his thin lips, Suda's eyes widened in disbelief, his mind reeling a flux of different thoughts from the revelation. A vampire? This changes everything, he thought harrowingly, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. If Anik truly was a vampire, then perhaps he held the key not only to curing this strange affliction, but also to unravel the mysteries surrounding Suda's sudden arrival in this realm. A vampire, Suda murmured, his voice trembling slightly. I never thought I'd encounter one, let alone in a place like this. Anik's smile widened, revealing a set of sharp, gleaming fangs. But you have, human, and now the question still remains. What shall I do with you? Suda swallowed hard, his mind racing to find the right words. He knew he had to tread carefully, for one wrong move could spell his doom. Please, SSR Anik, or is it accursed one? He began, saying that the response he drew from the vampire was one less than impressed. Say Sir Anik it is. Ahem. 1,000 apologies. Ahem. His voice was steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. I come to you not as a threat, but as a seeker of knowledge. If you truly possess the wisdom of other worlds, then perhaps we can help each other. The vampire tilted his head, his crimson eyes narrowing slightly. Help each other? And what, pray tell, could you offer me in return, human? Suda took a deep breath, his gaze never wavering from Anik's. My story, my experiences. What do you want? For a moment, Anik remained silent, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he lowered Suda to the ground, his grip on the human's arm loosening. Suda finally felt order returning to his mind again. He couldn't help but exhaling a relaxed breath in response. I thought my head was going to explode. You fell from someplace rather close by, didn't you? A certain land covered in bright singing little horrors, a large blue castle, and a night sky marred by 2 moons. Oh, he knows about candy. Of course he does, but why does this feel slightly? Despite his reservations, Suda gently nodded in response. He saw an almost menacing smile crease against Anik's pale features. Good. Then there is something you can do for me. Suda felt a cold sweat creeping down his spine. Suddenly, Anik's pale face drew dangerously closer to his own. You will help me take that castle, Human cuckoo, announced Anik darkly. Suda's eyes widened in shock, his heart skipping a beat almost whilst he processed what he was hearing. Take the castle? You mean Candy Castle? He stammered just to make sure he heard him correctly. Anik's smile widened, a predatory glint in his crimson eyes now glowing with wildness. Indeed, human, that very same castle, with its glittering blue walls and its legion of singing horrors. The castle that has long been a thorn in my side. Suta swallowed hard, his thoughts racing as he tried to process the vampire's words. Taking Candy Castle? On one hand, those singing sunflowers and talking animals were a pain in his side, but somehow the thought of usurping them felt rather wrong. But why? Why do you want to take the castle? He asked Anik, eager to understand what this was about. Anik leaned in closer, his cold breath ghosting over Suta's face. Because, human, within those walls lies a power that I have long sought, a power that could grant me the freedom I desire, the freedom to break free from this accursed golden moon, he said, raising a slender gray finger towards the twilight skies covered in stars. Suta's mind whirled with the possibilities. If the vampire was telling the truth, then perhaps this task could not only grant the vampire the redemption he craved, but also help both me and Demoria find our way home. But at what cost? He thought, a sense of unease settling in the pit of his stomach by those wild eyes awaiting for his response. Taking a deep breath, Suta met Anik's gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. If I help you take the castle, you will heal me, but also, there is one other thing I need. An air of seriousness moved around Suta now. He finally arrived at that place again, where a mixture of his own self and the world's luck afforded him a possibility. Anik's smile turned cruel, his fangs glinting beneath the strange moonlight glow. And pray tell what that may be? Home. I need you to help me get back to my old world. You promise me that, and I'll drag out every last one of those damned furry animals out of there myself. Suta spoke with a cold conviction. He never held no true allegiance to those strange folk, and if this was his only chance of getting both he and Demoria back home, he would burn that entire castle to the ground if necessary. Oh, interesting. Well, you have my word, for whatever that may be worth to you. Suta nodded, his jaw set in grim resolve. Then I accept your terms, Sir Anik. I will help you take Candy Castle, and in return, you will grant me what I seek. The vampire chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down Suta's spine. Excellent, human. You have made a wise choice, one that shall surely lead you to greatness or to your doom. With those ominous words, Anik released his grip on Suta's arm, allowing the human to stand on his own 2 feet once more. Now then, let us begin our preparations. We have much to do if we are to succeed in our endeavor. Suta took a steadying breath, his heart heavy with the weight of the task before him. He knew he was walking a dangerous path right now, one that could easily lead him into deepening waters. But what choice do I have? He thought, his mind filled with images of Demoria, of his mom, his dad, and lastly, Ringo. Walking into that portal with a broken smile. With a final nod, he staggered gingerly behind Anik into the depths of the forest, their fates now intertwined together as one. Chapter 54, Intermission. The Shinjin, an ode to the hateful eight. Suta stared dreamily into the dancing fire, watching the rising blue smoke ascend into the twilight embrace above. Currently, he was seated against a short log squared around a small clearing, cradled between his grasp, a wooden mug filled with a warm and surprisingly sweet liquid. It reminded him of coconut, with a subtle spicy flavor to it. The pain from his wound had subsided quite a bit, thanks to Anik's remedy. But it was the spiral of questions swirling around Suta's thoughts that proved to be the heaviest burden right now. Vampire. He's a vampire? Sigh, what a day. He breathed out, trying and failing to find tranquility in the swirling chaos. He was only just getting used to the idea of talking animals dressed in human clothes, only to again arrive at another fork in the road of discovery. Thankfully, Anik didn't seem that bad, considering what Suta understood about the nature of vampires. Well, outwardly he looked absolutely terrifying, but his actions had become rather more gentle all of a sudden. Now that I think about it, Wasn't it around the time those fairies mentioned I fell from the stars? And not to mention, I'm obviously not the first human he's met by the sounds of things, which should mean others have somehow come and gone from this place. Unconsciously, he balled his two hands into fists, feeling that familiar swell of determination take root and rousing dark thoughts within his mind. Home. I have to get us home. Suda held out his palm and conjured his badge again. According to the cooldown timer, he still had a while to go until he could use that mysterious skill again. Glitch. A faint rustling from the nearby foliage broke him away from his thoughts. It was the slenderly tall vampire re-emerging, this time with long gray furs draped over his torso. Anik sat adjacently across from him, slightly craning his neck a little closer towards the fire between them. Suda watched him with silent intrigue. Anik's grayish-pale skin and blood-soaked eyes shone a majestic glow behind the firelight. Suda felt a strange and somewhat inner rejection towards Anik's clear, terrifying beauty. The defined cheekbones, chiseled jawline, not to mention the hair and that sculpted body of his. Suda creased a slight frown. There's no mistaking it. He looks like he belongs in one of those young adult novels. SK, pretty boys. Anik remained indifferent. No words were spoken for a short, while until the tension was near enough, driving Suda mad. On more than one occasion, his lips parted, closed, then opened once again, as if he were struggling to find the right words to say. The silence stretched on, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the enchanted forest. Suda's mind raced with questions, his curiosity warring with his sense of caution. Should I ask him about the others who came before me? About how he knows of my world? Or should I focus on the task at hand, on the plan to take Candy Castle? He took a sip from his mug, the sweet, spicy liquid warming his throat and settling his nerves. Whatever path he chose, Suda knew he had to tread carefully. Anik may have shown him a modicum of kindness, but he was still a vampire, a creature of the night with motives and desires that were likely far beyond Suda's understanding. One step at a time, he reminded his fast-pacing heart, his gaze flickering between the dancing flames and Anik's ethereal features. Gain his trust, learn what you can, and find a way to save yourself and Demoria. With a steadying breath, Suta set his mug aside, his eyes meeting Anik's crimson gaze across the fire. Why you? Sigh. How did you know? I came from another world. Suta's voice cracked solemnly through the twilight air. Anik waited a few moments to respond, a glaze of reminiscence sparkling within his carmine-coated irises. I, too, had initially arrived here, from a distant world, he announced in a cool manner. Suta's eyes flashed wide into two saucers, before his gaze lowered and his thoughts began to whirl. That makes a lot of sense now. He held so many questions, but understood the time for open ears was now. Anik delicately pinched a thin branch and raised it, seeming interested in the last tiny fig, just about tethered to the tip of the thin stem. To know my origins, one must understand his own tale. After all, both he and I are forever entwined by the golden threads of fate. He held the tip of the branch over the crackling fire. Patiently, the last fig started to burn. And as for him, his own tale is one which started all of this. I speak of none other than the curse befallen the lineage of the Golden Dawn. The tragic tale of Queen Lunara and her 8 offspring. The Shinjin. Suda leaned forward, his eyes wide with curiosity and anticipation. The Shinjin? Who are they? And what does their tale have to do with you and me? Anik smiled, a cold, mirthless thing that sent a shiver down Suda's spine again. Patience, human. All shall be revealed in due time. The vampire turned his gaze back to the burning fig, watching as the flames consumed the tiny premature fruit, reducing it to ash in seconds. Queen Lunara was a ruler of great power and beauty, beloved by her people and blessed with 8 children, each more radiant than the last. But their happiness was not to last, for a great evil descended upon their kingdom, an evil born of jealousy and spite. Long ago, there was a realm once barren of grace, a realm wrought with chaos and murder, ruled by a host of nefarious outer deities. One day, across the darkness, a bright firmament breathed, and the first golden dawn was born. Over time, mortals would inhabit these plains, not only existing but also going on to rule and subjugate the masses. One sovereign would change the entire plane, once housing outer guardians forever. And her name, the Mortal Queen, later exalted to the pinnacle of a goddess. Lunara, the bringer of dawn. In time, her realm would be considered the centerpiece of godhood, a realm now ruled by an eternal queen whose beauty and majesty trumped those who came before and after. With each war won, her name became a song that both graced and set fear in the hearts of many. In a world where countless beings struggled, fought, and died over each one's claim to supremacy, only she remained. In a time when a kingdomless people demanded to be led, Queen Lunara decided to form a method of peace. She fashioned a single way, a new way, a way of perfect order, a way of golden beauty, of discipline and reverence, a way which aimed to reflect all the good traits of godhood. Through this, she split her powers into 8 rivers, each river purposely running beside the domain of each race. As such, Queen Lunara took 3 consorts for marriage. The consorts would hold some form of dominion or power amongst the races. It was with these consorts that she birthed numerous children, who now filled the land with a 9th new creation, demi-gods. Suda listened intently, his eyes wide with wonder as Anak wove the tale of Queen Lunara and her golden realm. It was a story of power, of ambition, and of a desire for peace that had shaped the very fabric of this world. And so, the demigods walked among the mortals, their divine blood granting them powers beyond imagining. They were the bridge between the celestial and the mundane, the living embodiment of Queen Lunara's vision for a united realm. Anak explained beneath the fiery flames. Anak paused, his crimson eyes flickering with an emotion Suda couldn't quite place. Was it nostalgia, regret, or something else entirely? But even the brightest of dawns must eventually give way to dusk, and so it was with Queen Lunara's golden age. For there were those who envied her power, and who sought to claim it for themselves, no matter the cost. The vampire's voice grew cold, a hint of ancient anger bleeding into his words. And so, the curse was born, a malevolent force that tore through the golden realm like a plague, corrupting all it touched. The demigods, once the shining beacons of Lunara's legacy, would become stains upon the land she had fashioned as an imprint of her perfect way. Amongst her children, there was one who would be the catalyst for this accursed fall, Prince Nocturne, the founder of the necromances, the defiler, the false king, and the patriarch of shadows. Chapter 55, Intermission Part 2, Nocturne the Prince of Shadows, Dusk and Dawn. Amidst Lunara's progeny were 2 demigods in particular, who would be the catalyst for the war amongst the Shinjin. Celestia of the Dawnlight and Nocturne the Prince born with abilities aligning him with the eternal darkness. Both were born of the same celestial bloodline, but destined for vastly different fates. Celestia, the youngest of the Shinjin and by far the most radiant and benevolent, embodied the daylight aspect of Lunara's power. Nocturne, however, harbored the darkness within him of his warlord father, drawn to the shadows that lurked at the edges of their divine existence. As Celestia's popularity grew among mortals, Nocturne's heart twisted with envy. But aside from his ambition was a forbidden love that dared not speak its name, the love he harbored for his radiant sister. But laws etched into time itself by their mother forbade such unions. Yet the siblings found solace in clandestine meetings beneath the celestial gaze. In the shadows, a clandestine alliance formed. Nocturne found a familiar voice in the midst of his twisting heart, the manipulative and malevolent forces of a weak and defeated outer deity known as the Abyss. And so, it would begin the conspiracy with rogue celestial beings to dethrone the goddess queen, Lunara. The plot unfolded in the darkened corridors of the divine palace, where whispers of betrayal echoed through halls once bathed in divine light. Finally, on the fateful night of a celestial eclipse, a cosmic event that occurred once in a millennium, the siblings' forbidden love was exposed by a silent watcher. On the same night, Lunara's eldest son, Aurelian, Nocturne's full brother of blood, was killed. These events shattered the fragile harmony of the realm, casting a pall of sorrow over the land. Lunara, heartbroken by the treachery of her kin, whilst dealing with the first death of a demigod, descended into madness. Nocturne, manipulated and driven by the forces he had unleashed, seized power from Lunara, casting her into exile within the desolate expanse of the Veiled Abyss. With his newfound dominion, Nocturne waged war against Celestia and those loyal to the betrayed goddess. The celestial realms were torn asunder by the conflict, with mortals caught in the crossfire and the Shinjin running amok. With the realm now godless, each of Lunara's protégés would stake their right to rule their mother's fallen empire. Celestia, fueled by grief and the desire to free her mother from the Veiled Abyss, led a resistance against Nocturne's malevolent reign. As the war raged, sibling turned against sibling, and the once glorious realm descended into chaos. Sylvana, the princess of Starborn and one of the most fearsome among the Shinjin, would cross the 8 rivers once formed as sacred borders between the races, leading a scourge of famous silver-flagged bands across the realms. As such, she would succeed in severing the heads of the 8 kings, only to arrive at Dawn Hill, where her 2 half-brothers would stand in wait for her, the princes of Stoneheart, the half-giants Lionrock and Rorgo. They say their battle went on for 12 days straight, causing earthquakes and a relenting storm to engulf the surrounding lands. The tragic tale unfolded with celestial battles that painted the night sky with tears and blood. Celestia's love for her brother clashed with the duty to restore balance, while Nocturne, consumed by his forbidden desires, plunged the realm deeper into darkness. In the final confrontation beneath the cosmic eclipse, Celestia faced the impossible choice: save her brother or save her mother's realm. But suddenly, Celestia vanished, alongside her half-brother Graham, the eldest prince of Stoneheart. Nocturne's demise arrived shortly after. He was forced into submission and sentenced to death by the last mortal devotees of the sealed Queen of Dawn, thus bringing a tragic end to their tale, the Shinjin. Suda sat in stunned silence, his heart heavy with the weight of Anik's tale. The story of Celestia and Nocturne, of the celestial war that had torn their realm asunder, was one of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of forbidden desire. And so, the Shinjin were scattered. Anik continued, his crimson eyes glinting in the firelight. Their powers sealed away, their divine tomes sealed, and their fates unknown. Some say they were cursed to wander the mortal realms, forever seeking a way to break the chains that bind them. Others say that most of them were killed during that war, whilst the very few, well, there was one, who managed to live a little longer than. Suta swallowed hard, his mind reeling with the implications of the vampire's words. He suddenly remembered something fleeting. Anik mentioned there were 8 of them. In fact, he was quite sure after hearing the tale that Anik missed one of the Shinjin. Why you mentioned only 7? What happened to the 8th Shinjin? He found confidence in his curious thoughts, unable to forget a single detail about the things told to him. Suda noticed a slightly tense look vaguely appearing across Anik's mask before he shifted his gaze toward the flames crackling between them. Heh, you're more attentive than you look. Yes, there were indeed 8 of them. The Prince of Golden Dawn himself, my master and friend. Anik's sharp teeth gritted together. Suda couldn't discern what was wrong, but he felt dense emotions pouring out from the usually stoic vampire. Is he having a breakdown? He earnestly asked himself, but after a while, Anik slowly broke out from his inward tussle. With a cruel smile, he affixed his carmine gaze upon Suda and softly spoke. The malevolent prince of Starborn, the gentle-hearted one. Lyson, Chapter 56, the one who wields golden wisdom. History might remember one of the greatest feats of Lunara's reign: the unification between all races, particularly a sparsely populated yet fearsome race known as the Night Walkers. These creatures of the night found strength beneath the moon in the rich blood of strong creatures. The stronger, the better. At one point, they were rightfully confused with demons, as their gray skin and red eyes were almost immediate recognition of their ties to the demon race. But demons they were not, almost immortal in the way their bodies were formed. But these enigmatic creatures still held their own weaknesses, with sunlight being a glaringly obvious one. Yet Queen Lunara, a self-professed conqueror of dawn, shocked her loyal followers once more by conquering the plague of the sun. She created a veil over the realm that changed the sun's glow, allowing all to dwell without fear of its affliction. This resulted in an oath made by the king of the Night Walkers, ensuring that as long as a child of Lunara breathed life, An heir to the throne of night would always be devoted as a loyal steward. 6 of the 8 Shinjin were granted a loyal servant of the night from birth because of this. Why you? Wait, this race? They were vampires, weren't they? Suda blurted forth suddenly. The response of silence from Anak was telling. Anak merely smoothed his elegant silken strands of hair back before continuing. When I met Lyson, he was still young, as was I. But my people aged differently. Therefore, you would never tell we were the same age. While Lyson was born arrayed in gold, his smile, his hair, and his wisdom, I, on the other hand, was born on the other end of the spectrum. Darkness was my home. The cold and unfilial lands where my father's usurped kingdom remained broken into fragments of its past self. I held no kin, only the instincts of survival, to kill or be killed. There was no trust nor camaraderie. From childhood, I was taught one simple thing. Seek to kill them first, else they kill you next. The only freckle of hope I held was the small trace of blood that aligned me to the first king who made the oath with the goddess. An unbreakable oath that saw me ripped away from the black stones of murder and vile bloodshed and suddenly thrust into a world filled with hope, warmth, and smiles. As you can imagine, this was unexpected and unusual for someone like myself, born in darkness. The Prince of Golden Dawn taught me many things, though the most important lesson I learned from him was this. Those who choose to show you kindness, despite the chaos surrounding them, are perhaps the most dangerous people you'll ever meet. Suda sat comfortably with his legs cradled closely to his chest, staring dreamily into the fires as he awaited Anak's continuation. Anak had just finished roasting what Suda imagined was once a rabbit's foot before setting it aside on a loose log to cool down. He wiped his hands against a small handkerchief and set it aside neatly. Now then, where was I? Anak mused before continuing. The Shinjin were the first of their kind, demi-gods born between the union of a mortal and a goddess. But even Lunara, in all her splendor, was not exempt from the laws of this world. With the unique gifts bestowed upon her children, a curse followed closely behind, tethered to each one. A curse from one of the ghosts of the felled outer gods. The same way my people were cursed by direct sunlight. Lyson, though golden in all ways, was deaf and mute, unable to speak nor conjure the words of power. He was considered unable to cast incantations. But of course, a demigod's prowess was of a different caliber altogether. Lyson learned to rely on his hands. His incredible wisdom coupled with his graceful way of handling things proved to be world-changing. And thus, he created marvels within the silence of the world around him. One strange morning, I was with Lyson when he made a discovery, just before Nocturne's betrayal. A dream Lyson had beheld within his own silent ambitions finally bloomed. The truth that we were merely one spark amongst a vast world of stars. The existence of countless worlds was mind-blowing, but Lyson wasn't done shocking me. He revealed a strange creation of his, something he believed would help us cross the veil between worlds. A contraption made out of 2 parts. He called it the Apple of Crux. Suda could hardly catch his breath, feeling his heartbeat surging wildly. So, you both ended up traversing this V-veil. And then what is that? Is that how you arrived at C-Suda began, but Anak cut him off. Human, be still with your thoughts, Anak sighed. I haven't finished. There was little time for Lyson to test and inform his kin about this discovery, especially when we were dealing with something troublesome. A lingering essence of an outer god terrorizing the land, the wicked witch of the northern road. Both Lyson and I were called into action, and confronting this tempest wasn't easy. I was on the verge of defeat when Lyson made a choice. GRH. A choice that changed everything. He activated the apple and sent us 3 across the veil. And as you can imagine, what happened next was self-explanatory. We ended up being thrust into a world far beyond our usual realm, a place he would later call Candy. Although at that time, it was fewer furry animals and 2 moons and was, well, it was nothing short of hell, where monsters and plagues ran amok. Things were so bad that we joined forces with the Witch of the Northern Road just to have a chance at survival. Time passed, and with it formed an unlikely friendship between a demigod and the accursed outer god. Fufufu, of course, only such things could happen on a distant world. With Lyson's wisdom, he managed to form a rune, the first incantation I had ever witnessed him perform. Oh, any which caused him to lose the light in one of his eyes, and the feeling in his legs as a result of its obscenity. Fiske, he did it all for her. For that cursed witch. What did he? He created a spell, a one-of-one that split the demonic essence away from every creature roaming across Candy, their souls tethered to a veil hidden in plain sight. It was absurd to even think about how he pulled it off, but that was Lyson. His wisdom far transcended anything rationale. But one day, Lyson felt something in the sleeping apple, a small freckle of light, a foreboding that his beloved sister, Sylvana, was about to die at the hands of his half-brothers. Suddenly, Lyson abandoned all the whimsical creatures he had formed from the devilish genes of the monsters that once roamed those lands. He formed the castle where the northern witch rests her helm and, with it, left me behind, cursed beneath this golden moon as a reminder of his hold over my pitiful life. Chapter 57, Siphon. Suda POV. Suda remained seated in the same spot for a moment, unsure whether he was feeling shock, sadness, indignation, or simply indifference towards it all. One thing was certain, though. The story about the Shinjin and Queen Lunara was perhaps the most tragic tale he had ever heard. And here I was thinking I had it bad with Ringo. Queen Lunara's children were forced into a war amongst one another. A war over greed and deception, Suda thought to himself, recalling similar situations between historical empires of old he had read about, where vying for supremacy had caused siblings to spill each other's blood. What troubled him most was the uncertainty surrounding Lyson. He left Candy to save his sister, someone who was considered deaf and crippled. But what happened to him afterward, I wonder? Suda couldn't shake the uneasiness he felt towards that part of the story. Lyson, a deaf and mute prince said to be graced with infectious golden wisdom, had reinvented the entire landscape of Candy. Piecing the fragments of truth in order allowed him to begin to gain insight into a piece of this incredibly dark history. Lyson is the runaway groom, then, I take it? And I'm guessing he's also the one in those pictures. Did he obscure his face from those portraits purposely? Suda asked himself in deep thought, his gaze still aimlessly watching the dancing fires between both him and the vampire. Finding no direct answers to his host of questions right now, he could only release a depressing sigh, massaging the bridge of his nose as he pondered how all of this fit in with what he knew about this place. After a short while, he raised his chin and placed an inquisitive glare toward Anik, not foolish enough to believe this fellow wasn't concealing secrets. Beforehand, you mentioned someone taught you about these things concerning multiple worlds, humans, and the history of the Shinjin. I'm right in thinking this person. This was Lyson, wasn't it? Anik's expressionless mask wilted a little, but he eventually exhaled a deep breath, casting his ruby eyes toward the starry twilight again. He was my only friend. No, I was his steward. Because of that oath, sworn between a relic of my kind and the goddess of dawn herself, I became his shadow, his confidant, and he was my tutor. A brother I never had. Suda couldn't help grimacing at the thought of those demi-gods being charged with vampires. So being these all-powerful demi-gods wasn't enough. They needed personal vampire bodyguards as well. Talk about overkill, he chided to himself before tuning back into reality. I was sworn to protect and follow him wherever he went, and yet, at the most crucial moment, where he needed me the most, I failed. Suta studied Anik in silence, noticing a real look of sadness muddled with guilt drawn across his glittering blood-soaked gaze. Then, what happened between you two? Why didn't you follow him? Anik's expression changed into a mask of cold anger. I couldn't. He made it so that I was cursed beneath this false golden moon. Suda tilted his head, casting an empty stare into the blanket of nightingale covered in stars, focusing mainly on that golden half-shaped moon glittering in the distant expanse. Now that he had been told what it was, he could faintly see glittering golden particles dancing like fireflies in orbit. He remembered seeing the similar particles a few times beforehand. One, when he was reading through Granny Baba's old notes. Incantations were constructed in hundreds of energy particles, brought to life by the caster's mana and words of power. A sudden realization hit Suda at that moment. Oh, I get it. The curse, the golden moon. It was Lyson's doing. He remembered what Anik had said to him concerning the first incantation Lyson cast. He imagined that wasn't the last. A pained look flashed across Anik's gaze in response, but he refused to respond and merely rose to his towering height. His gold and frightening glare fixed upon Suda with a dangerous light, causing him to be scared out of his wits. "Rise," Anik demanded sternly. Suda hesitated, but ultimately found himself unable to disobey the imposing fellow. As he staggered upright, he noticed a change in his mobility. The pain has gone? By some miracle, he was no longer anchored down by that terrible wound to his side. Suda could hardly believe it and took a brave look at the wound against his side. Those dark claw marks were still present, and the wound hadn't changed much, still a blackish sewer green tint. The tonic you drank would begin the healing process, but the curse itself can only be handled using the arcane. Unfortunately, we, the undead race, hold no talent within that field, Anik said, walking casually around the fire until his slender form towered beside Suda. "But I do have this." Suda watched inquisitively while Anik placed a single hand against his wound. Siphon. A carmine glow formed over his palms, and Suda felt a weird surge of warmth gathered against his side. It felt slightly painful, but the pain was closely followed by relief. He watched with intrigue laced with subtle uncertainty, unsure where this was heading. "Wait a minute, Siphon. Isn't that an incantation?" As though he could almost read his thoughts, Anik spoke again. "How much do you know about skill sets and abilities?" Suda smoothed his chin in deep thought, trying to remember the bits and pieces he recalled from that hairy-armed, rough-talking man from the carriage a great while back. Not a lot was the truth to that question. Skill sets, or skills commonly known, are widely accessible and are achieved through practice or receiving a skill book. Most of the strongest skills take longer to hone complete mastery over. Unlike abilities that are specifically tailored to your own self, an ability is somewhat almost a unique attribute, one not easily obtained like a skill. And an ability's measured power goes by the level of intent one holds. Intent is the basis of all fighting techniques. Anik removed his palm, and the glowing reddish glow ceased. But he wasn't finished there. He presented the same hand to Suda and slowly opened his palm. "My ability allows me to drain, alleviate, suck away, or dispel all traces of mana. Rule number 1: human curses, at the core of their disastrous intent, in the end, they are just mana." Against his open palm was an inky black liquid, almost rousing, volatile like a flame. Staring at the bubbling black agent, Suda sensed nothing but terrible feelings from it. Slowly, he placed a questioning gaze upon Anik again. "Rotted lion skin's poison. An old curse, one which was born from the terrible amalgamation of the black-skinned lion and a nightmare creature. A beast that sparred on the level with the Shinjin He. It is most curious, to say the least, seeing you bearing scars of meeting one." Suda felt a slight air of distrust surrounding Anik's look, but he thought it was somewhat understandable. "Even I have no idea about most of the things I end up going through." Staring aimlessly into nowhere while he went through that incident again, he remembered the sudden appearance of those creatures and that terrible feeling of powerlessness and fear. There were two of them, strange creatures with gray skin and no eyes. He struggled to explain, those memories still freshly clinging to his mind. Anik eventually closed his open palm, the bubbling sounds from that poisonous ooze subsiding, and the vampire finally lowered his hand. "Rest for the night. In the morning we set out," he announced in his usual cold and placid tone. Set out? Where are we going? Where else? Back to the Blue Castle, of course." Chapter 58, Prowess and Intent. Suda POV. Suda felt a wave of restlessness covering his bones. He slept in intervals during the night, but found he could never truly be at peace nor relax underneath the tension of his surroundings. To be honest, the air was mostly quiet and gentle, but he couldn't shake away the story of the Shinji. He stirred beneath the furs he was given to cover himself with and eventually found himself lying on his back. His eyes stared into the dreamscape expanse above, and so he ended up stargazing for most of the night. Time passed, and even that became a chore after he quickly realized there was no daytime here. Only the twilight, the stars, and the golden half-moon. "Demoria, I hope you're safe." His heart trembled whenever he thought about her, Leaving her alone in that strange castle felt devastating. More so, now that he was questioning whether or not this skill he mysteriously held was the cause of all of this made him feel 10 times more worse. The constant tussle between his thoughts was enough to spur him awake. Upon rising to his feet, he found Anik busying himself with a large map sprawled against the ground. With curious steps, Suda made his way towards him. The map was quite big, so he ended up crouching against one side of it. Scanning the contents of the map, he noticed there were no words or symbols drawn on it, but a very detailed drawing depicting one side of a large world, most of which was surprisingly covered in the ocean. 3 distinctively large masses of land were etched across specific parts, with one of the islands housing a noticeably giant-sized tree. Suda's eyes lifted, and he placed a finger on the island, peering into Anik's gaze. "Is this where we are?" he asked, paying close attention to the different large islands drawn against the 4 corners of the map. Anik softly nodded before pointing towards the largest mass of land dwelling on the other side of the detailed map. Suda swallowed harshly, guessing that must be Kandy, where the blue castle stood and where Demoria currently was. That's a lot of sea between us and there. Not to mention these tiny shaped islands in between. He frowned, taking it all in, already knowing this was going to be a headache. More concerning is how I managed to teleport all the way here. And why here? But I guess I should be glad it's not out across the middle of the sea. A cold shiver ran down his spine at the thought. The lack of control he held with this skill was troubling, but Suda understood he would need to acquire mastery over it sooner rather than later. "Human, say, can you defend yourself?" Anik asked him suddenly. Suda felt a little embarrassed by that question for some reason, and scratched the side of his nose whilst stammering on his words. "Why am I bothered by that? It's not like it's news to me. Ugh, do I want to seem tough in front of him? SK, I've become just like those fairies." Eventually, he arrived at a simple, "And no, I don't think so," replying rather sheepishly, reminded of his weaknesses. Anik didn't show any great deal of change within his expression, merely allowing his gaze to fall against the map again. "It'll be a difficult journey for the both of us, and while I can very much guarantee my own survival, you, on the other hand, I'm afraid I can't be wholeheartedly assured I can keep you safe." Suda felt the weight of those words forming a stone in his throat, directly blunt and straightforward. "Heh, can't really be annoyed at that, can I?" He creased a self-mocking grin. "Therefore, we'll be using any spare time along the way to empower you. Combat is a basic requirement for traversing any kind of plane, whether it's this world or your own. You're no good to me or yourself if you're dead. So we'll start off with the basics right now. Prepare yourself well, human. I have no real sense of, what does your kind call it, holding back." Afterward, Anik scooped low and retrieved the map into his grasp, looking as though he was done with their discussion, leaving a speechless Suda left to reel over the one-sided discussion. Sea combat. A whole host of thoughts started spiraling through his mind. In spite of the obvious perils awaiting their voyage, Suda couldn't help but romanticize the idea of finally being able to learn some form of combat techniques. His main focus was still discovering how he could learn arcane, but after his recent encounter with those nightmarish creatures, there was no harm in perhaps equipping his body to withstand different scenarios that may appear before him in the future. Time passed on gently. Anik had changed his clothes to fit someone who at least looked the part of a traveling hunter, although his clothes still managed to end up fitting tightly against his slender body while maintaining that gothic dark look he seemed to have going on. Suda, on the other hand, had been given slightly oversized hunter's wares, light brown leathers with loose robes and trousers. He felt like a cross between a monk and a miner, but wasn't complaining too much. His attention was more focused on the fellow, standing ready just ahead of him. Before setting out, Anik was hellbent on gauging Suda's combat prowess. Suda, of course, quickly told him that he had absolutely none whatsoever, but the shrewd vampire was not letting up. "And now, sigh, I'm forced to partake in what will almost definitely be a one-sided beatdown. Well, guess I should try not to lose straight away, at least. Okay, come on, Suda, let's see what we got." It was hard to ignore the obvious truth staring him right in the face, but besides that, Suda was one who wouldn't give up on a challenge so easily. One of the few things he took pride in about himself was his will not to shy away from challenges. He squared his footing and raised his two fists just a little above eye level, unconsciously adopting a boxing stance. Memories of his time, spent sparring with his seniors, came flooding back to him. Suda enrolled into a boxing club, as well as judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. The corners of his mouth pulled upward before a serene breath exhaled through his mouth. Suda steadied his breathing, feeling his heartbeat through his fists. Ah, this feeling. I miss this. Feeling a swell of euphoria welling in his chest, Suda felt a familiar calm moving through his bones again, just like the times he readied himself before a spar. On the other side, Anik stood completely still without so much as adopting a fighting stance. We'll start off with the basics. Try to follow my movements and at least dodge one of my attacks. I'll restrict myself to attacking with a single hand, and I'll also keep my movements to my right leg. I hope you're ready, human. Here I come. As soon as those words were spoken, Suda's confidence was suddenly washed away. He lowered his guard, his eyes casting a look of deep confusion at the scene before him. Anik had hopped to one side, maintaining his earlier promise of only using his right leg, but his movements had been so quick a ghostly afterimage trailed his step. Then he hopped towards the other side. Suda could have sworn he saw three Aniks moving together, which completely startled him into a helpless stare. Before he gained another second to observe, Anik suddenly took a forward step and rushed towards him, the speed of which was so fast that Suda only managed a single exhale before he felt a firm force striking him in the dead center of his torso. He felt the strike before he saw it. A horrible feeling of weightlessness cloaked his ascending body. Suda's world spun 360 degrees before he found himself crashing against the firm ground. By the time his body stopped rolling, he was staring with wide eyes toward the starry twilight above, his chest heaving hurried breaths as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. STR strong. So strong. Not only was that one of the coolest things he had ever experienced, but Suda could also tell that despite that oppressive force, Anik had very much held back. He heard footsteps softly approaching and the towering silhouette of the gracefully adorned vampire glaring down upon him. So only this level. I see. Well then, human, you best accustom yourself with tasting the cold dirt from now on. We'll be replaying this scenario every chance we get. Now get up. We're leaving. As Suda and Anik made their way down the sloping stone road, a sudden thought appeared within Suda's mind. Say, who taught you how to fight like that? He asked the aloof vampire walking beside him, massaging the back of his head from the earlier impact. Anik lazily moved his carmine gaze towards him. My mother, he replied stiffly. Oh, she must have been strong. Was she a vampire too? Suda noticed a slight air of hesitancy before Anik chose to respond again. She was like you. She was a human. My father was the cursed one, born from a bloodline of undead spawn who relied on drinking blood to survive. Suda nodded, wondering why Anik subtly reminded him of a human. Well, someone who once was one. His mannerisms and way of speech were a dead giveaway. You told me briefly about your oath to one of the Shinjin, Lyson? I imagined you were close. Anik raised his helm towards the stars again, that rigid look of melancholy plastered against his features. He was my lord. I, his servant. Close? Have you ever felt half of your heart being carved out of your chest? There was nothing I wouldn't do for him, even if it meant taking my own life. I was bound to his will like the moon was to the sun. Suta started to feel Anik's solemnness clouding over him also. He could feel his sadness, his loss, and his regret. I guess it's the same with me, my family. I've lost so much. Sometimes I have to remind myself of who I once was.
Shoba.
I know what it must feel like to lose someone you love. I have lost a lot too. The pain still ate away at his gut whenever he remembered them. These days, he thought of them less but hurt even more when their faces did appear. Suda's entire mood had gone through a change. He clenched his two fists whilst walking, a cold light shining across his eyes. Anik didn't miss this, of course. He held a somewhat indifferent yet curious look while watching the boy's side profile in silence. Turning away, his cold mask soon reappeared. We'll need a sturdy boat to cross the Emerald Seas. Along the way, there will be multiple islands we'll use to hunt for food and replenish water. Remember what I told you before. You must hone your combat skills along the way, for what we may have to face. Tisk, Those last sentences bothered Suda a little. What we might have to face. He can't be talking about those furry idiots, can he? Just remembering those two fellows in particular almost made Suda chuckle. Damn, am I missing those weirdos already? Sigh. I guess that castle wasn't half as bad as all of this. That reminds me, why do the fairies live here, so far away from the Blue Castle? He asked the vampire. Anek's eyes narrowed a little more before he opened his mouth as said. They were driven out by the old Mad Queen. You see, once Lyson departed, a great deal of the harmony he had built left with him. Wait, I remember something. The Deceptors, that can't be. A wry smile creased against Anek's face. They were told a lie about the fairies, who were the original inhabitants of this realm before Lyson's spell. But of course they would buy into the lies sold to them. Suda walked on in silence. A terrible, foreboding feeling fell upon him as he wondered just how deep these secrets traveled. I need to get us out of here. And fast. Suda felt a little annoyed with himself that he hadn't gotten the chance to eat anything. Come to think of it, all I've had so far are berries and dried fruits. He rubbed his stomach with a curious glint swirling around his gaze. Don't tell me I'm somehow immune to starvation, am I? No, that's absurd. It must have something to do with those berries. Suda recalled when he had first started eating those tiny balls of delight. Unsurprisingly, he hadn't felt hungry since then. That was possibly all the proof he needed about the nature of those berries. The conversation between the duo grew less and less, mostly because of Anek, who didn't really seem like he was in the mood to talk about his origins. Actually, Suda soon realized the slender vampire wasn't in the mood for anything at all. Every question he raised was met with a low growl or a head nod. I guess I should enjoy the ambience then, he half thought to himself soon enough. The air surrounding them had grown noticeably warmer, and Suda faintly captured the wafting aroma of burning sweet spices. Before long, the surrounding scene of slender tall trees covered in bluegrass and autumn leaves changed a little. Tiny rolling hills soon took center stage, littered across a vast valley filled with vibrant signs of life. Thin valleys appeared fashioned into narrow pathways, with wooden signposts and wicker-made stalls appearing. From the arch-shaped doors to the tall roving windmills, the thin stream of emerald-colored waters passing through very short bridges. Suda could hardly believe what he was seeing right now. To think within the crowded and silent jungle, an entire civilization like this existed. The incessant chattering echoed softly from the thousands of tiny voices he could see muddled between the light twinkling of many, many tiny wings. Fairs, and lots of them. Their whimsical town was everything he imagined a place inhabiting fairies would look like, and more. Decorated with countless paper lanterns slung from tree to tree, with acorns entwined between thin wicker-made wires, spaced apart just enough to allow the soft wind to knock them against each other, spurring a melodic clatter. Most of these fairies were dressed in rural clothes, wearing little hats or pieces of fabric cut apart to make a bandana or a shawl. Suda felt like he had walked into a dream. He merely stood on the outskirts, soaking in every fine detail of this place. It was moments like this that reminded him just how beautiful all of this was. Anek was less than graceful about things. He took a few moments to survey the area before proceeding forward with a stern look plastered across his pale face. Chapter 59. The Midnight Tribe. Meeting the Chief. Suda POV. Anek's figure cut a stark contrast to the soft setting surrounding them both. To Suda, he was almost like an existence that marred and roughened the beauty of this expanse. A feeling he soon noticed was equally shared by the surrounding populace the moment they set foot into this place filled with countless fluttering, tiny-winged creatures. The moment the fairies sensed their arrival, all matters seemed to have halted, as though time itself had stopped. At first, their faces shared that all too familiar look of pure horror, but surprisingly, other than noticeably moving to the side to form a clear path of entry for them both. None of them said a single word, nor did they fly away and hide. That was Suda's expected reaction. They're probably used to seeing this guy by now. Doesn't look it though, he thought to himself, watching the countless large-eyed tiny figures surrounding them. A part of Suda had assumed they had fallen into an old children's book. Anek didn't seem fazed, of course. He walked straight through the path they created for them, and Suda kept himself closely beside him, halfway torn between sheer embarrassment and a little excitement about this discovery. So many of them, fairies. How incredible! He thought, unable to peel his gaze away from these whimsical-looking beings who came in all shapes and hair colors. Their bright, wide eyes beheld him in a curious light, and a lot of them would whisper or physically drag their compatriots over to see them. It was a strange scene taking place, yet quite a marvel to be at the center of. Suda trailed his gaze upwards, towards that pale stone mask of Anak walking beside him in silence. "Are they always like this?" he asked in that usual straightforwardly childish manner fitting his appearance. Anak slightly frowned before the creases relaxed again. He looked disturbed while he thought of something. "Extremely so," he coldly replied after a short while. By the time they both reached what felt like the heart of this vibrant shire, Suda had been swarmed by dozens of these tiny winged creatures. The younger-looking ones in particular were prone to fluttering right up to him, inspecting his outward appearance thoroughly before flying away to a safe distance again. Others would downright tug at one of his loose pink locks, sniff at it a little before childish giggles ensued. Their very essence was rather adorable to look at, so Suda wasn't so bothered about all the attention he was receiving. He was even growing fond of the tiny-sized sprites, a dozen or so feet ahead. He found their stiff march had come to a sudden halt. Realizing this, he removed his attention away from the surrounding fairies and focused on the object ahead of him. They had arrived at a forked sandy path. One way veered left, and the other veered towards the right. Suda wasn't really paying close attention to the trailing paths, finding his gaze intensely observing a wooden statue placed right in front of them. The statue was expertly carved into a beautiful-looking young man standing on a circular iron disc. He observed the figure, intrigued with how much detail went into it, from the prestige styling of his hair to the gentleman's clothing, and the opened book balanced on his palm. How cool. Can't say I can remember seeing such expertly woven craftsmanship before in person. But then again, when had I ever really paid attention to fine art in the first place? Did the fairies make this? His curiosity quickly shifted his focus towards his tall companion standing beside him, a question beckoning on the tip of his tongue. Just when Suda was poised to part his lips aside, the cruel smile he witnessed creasing manically across Anak's pale face forced the hurried breath back down his throat. The vampire's already intense stare narrowed even more menacingly. It could pierce holes into the thing, and then leave burns that caught fire and turned it into a pile of ash. Right, so that's not the normal response towards a simple statue. Now that I think about it, Suta studied the beautiful-haired youth adorned in soft, polished wood. There was a smile on its face and an opened book resting on its palm. Suta's mind began traversing through memories and past things he remembered from his earlier conversations between him and Anak. And then, as though the lights had finally been turned on, Suta remembered that story. It's him, Lyson, the runaway prince. Suta couldn't confirm this thought, but something told him he wasn't wrong at all, considering the strange relationship he sensed Anak shared with that runaway prince. He called himself his steward, but I can tell it's a lot deeper than that. And more bizarrely enough, why is there a statue of him in the middle of the place where fairies stay? Suda remained idly in wait while he watched the vampire going through a string of emotions in quick succession. In time, Anak's emotions did stabilize, and that familiar coldness returned to his glittering carmine-colored irises. Anak didn't bat Suda a single eye as he uttered a short sentence before he rather forcefully turned his head away. "Let's go," he coldly said. The acorns gently knocked together, ensuing a soft chime dancing against the thin breeze gently moving across this meadowy plain. Despite feeling as though they had been walking for quite a while, Suda didn't mind the walk. The air around this place was strangely infectious. Beneath the twilight starry night, the Shire was bathed in the soft glow of golden fiery lamps. The air was constantly filled with strange, stringed instruments, and what sounded like folklore songs and laughter erupted from small homes nestled in the dirt. That unmissable golden half-moon above only added to this serene, whimsical ambience, which reminded Suda of the festive periods during winter. He remembered Granny Ma and her little stall from his old world. Things have changed so much. I'm hardly remembering my old life these days. While Suda was busying his mind with the old, he heard the fluttering of tiny wings twinkling just beside his left ear, followed shortly after by a childish giggle. A little fairy with short green hair and round, full cheeks appeared out of seemingly nowhere. The familiar tiny-sized, pointy-eared fairy propped itself comfortably against his shoulder. The little guy was beaming with joy as it turned towards him with a wide, childish grin. "Hello there, mister. You're alive." I knew you were kind." Its soft, melodic voice somehow managed to brighten the shadows of doubt lurking inside of Suda. He creased a warm smile in return, using his littlest finger to very gently stroke the top of the little guy's head. Hey, and not so hard, The little fairy's entire face turned beet red in response, after which, its clear eyes scoped around the surroundings before turning its large gaze towards Suda again, with a look of curiosity pondering against its wide eyes. "Are you off to visit the chief?" the little guy asked. "HM? The chief?" Suda thought to himself, twisting ever so slightly towards his right where Anik walked in his usual solemn gloom. Without raising his stern glare, Anik nodded slightly. "Yes, I have some business with the chief of the fairy tribe. A matter concerning a certain boat we'll be needing. Also, try not to get wrapped up in fairy business." His tone seemed a little odd whilst he said that. Suda agreed with a gentle nod of his own. "They look so homely and pleasant, but I'll be foolish to think everything is rosy on the outside." By now, Suda felt way too anxious to remain relaxed. He was glad the fairies seemed quite welcoming, but who could say what waited for him around the corner? Experience had left lingering doubts about enjoying true peace. Sometime later, at the end of their neatly trudged earthy trail, they arrived upon a sizable gazebo covered in thin blue veils, with golden embroidery and a tassel covered in golden bells. There were 3 distinctively dressed fairies outside, seemingly awaiting their arrival. On the left was a pretty-faced fairy with pink hair, who wore a yellow and pink dress with her hands resting in white gloves. She glanced once at Suda before her fair cheeks turned beet red in response. The one on the far right was dressed in dark violet robes. She had curly gray and black hair with large emerald eyes filled with a curious glint. Suda noticed her gaze lingering on him longer than the others. As for the one in the middle, his outward appearance and jovial look immediately told Suda he must be this so-called chief. He was still very much just as tiny as everyone else here, but wore a blue turban and matching silk robes with a gray tunic underneath. His forked white beard touched his round belly, and his tiny squinted eyes sat comically over a wide, jovial smile. With both arms behind his back, he sped up his tiny wings and drew closer to the arriving duo. "Greetings, friends from afar. Oh ho ho, how delightful it is to see visitors gracing our tribal lands after such a long time." The goddess of the moon rejoices. The fairy elder buzzed around the two of them, making tiny circles all the while filling the air with guffawing shrills. The high-pitched noise made Suda take a few steps back in response. "I guess I should have expected nothing less from the leader of this lot." He pictured that haughty fairy with the red braid from before, wondering how the little fellow was faring. He could feel the little fellow perched on top of his shoulders, gently kicking its legs while humming to itself. Suda leaned a little towards it and asked, "Little one, is that your chief?" The little fairy brightened up, quite excited that Suda was talking to him again. "Mimim, chief of the Moon Valley tribe. And that's Mother Ruora, the fairest. She's so beautiful and earnest, but she's fated to wed the legendary king of the fairies." Suda chuckled a little, trying not to sound too rude in his tone. "King of the fairies? How cliché," he mused inwardly, feeling himself gradually being pulled into this world of mystique and bizarre. Compared to the talking lion and those other furries, Suda wasn't getting that same feeling of anxiety and worry from these fairy folk. Perhaps their very childish and whimsical appearance had created a false sense of purity and innocence, something that may lead to him making a fatal mistake if he underestimated them. He shook his head vigorously a little to dispel those thoughts of doubt. "I don't want to be too trusting, but in the same breath, I don't want to be too cynical either." He examined himself earnestly, remembering the things his father taught him about handling emotions and his attitudes. A small shudder of grief briefly flashed across his body as he processed those memories from an almost forgotten time. "Dad, I hope you're alive." Somewhere, Suda's eyes scanned over the third fairy in attendance who didn't immediately catch one's eye, but once he peered closer at her, he felt the most unsettling feeling surfacing. Her smile was brief, but also deceptively calm. It was a strange feeling watching her, as though she had met him before. Chapter 60, Prophecy of a New Moon. Suda POV. Anik's voice emerged with its usual tone of coldness. I need a boat, a good one, and I need one today. Suda paid extra attention to the stiff-talking vampire, who stood solemnly beside him, still dressed in that usual stone and stoic mask of emptiness. Suda noticed, strangely though, how Anik's stern gaze seemed to be half lingering on that silent fairy wearing purple robes, fluttering her tiny wings quietly behind the chief. But the jovially loud chief was the one who took center stage. He seemed to have the energy of dozens of fairies rolled into one. Suda could only nervously chuckle at his antics. He understood inwardly this was going to be a long evening already. A boat? A boat? A boat. A boat. Yes, we have boats. Oh ho ho. Good boats, and strong ones too. Come, let's go and see about these boats, my friend. Oh ho ho, I just had a great idea. The chief ascended gracefully to meet Anik's eye level. Shan't we share some tales over a nice spot of tea and good chatter, old friend? He suggested to the stone-faced Anik. Friend? Suda cocked one of his brows in surprise. The chief playfully whistled, lightly fluttering around the stoic-faced vampire, who Suda was quite surprised was doing a good job not swatting the buzzing fairy aside. He must surely be thinking of it though, I'd imagine. With a deep sigh, Anik simply shook his head from side to side. Not right now. We are pressed with time, he said, sounding a little nervous with his speech. You'd think he hates absolutely everything. But maybe he's a softy at heart, Suda thought to himself, watching the awkward conversation between the odd duo, whilst Anik adopted a surprisingly chilled manner in response to the chief. Ahaha, of course, tea is everlasting, but problems are current necessities. Oh, and what's our new friend's name here? The chief asked, only just taking in Suda's existence to the side. Suda flinched slightly, watching himself become the center of attention all of a sudden. Susuta, he stammered awkwardly. The chief's eyes brightened with excitement at the mention of that, and suddenly, Suda was the one having to deal with that incessant sound of fluttering tiny wings bothering his ears. Oh ho ho, that is delightful. Truly so. Now that we are three, that almost makes us a band of fellows. Oh wait, not quite. It makes us a motley crew. Oh ho ho. Say, new friend, care to amuse me with one question? Suda beheld the chief with an uncertain look, scratching the back of his head as he chuckled nervously. I shouldn't engage him, but what the heck? Sure. Care for some tea? The bearded fairy asked with glee. Suda glanced over towards Anik, whose deadpan gaze told him all he needed to know. No thanks, I'll pass, he lightly replied dutifully. Just before the chief held any chance to continue his rather one-sided conversation, Suda's attention swiftly captured the arrival of the silvery-haired fairy who approached the chief from his rear. She leaned over his shoulder before quietly whispering something into his ear. Of course, in a very not-so-subtle fashion. The fairy adorned in purple robes continued to steal looks at him all the while, giving Suda a very narrow guess as to who they must be talking about. The chief's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his jovial features as he listened to the silvery-haired fairy's hushed words with an intense concentration evident within his stiff expressions. What could they be discussing? And why do I get the feeling it has something to do with me? He mused silently, his gaze darting between the fairies and Anik, who looked a little annoyed watching the unfoldings. Oh, I see. If it's like that, then there's no helping it, is there? I'm afraid we'll have to take a rain check on the meeting. Oh ho ho, seems our fair maiden and our seer here have other plans with you, new friend. After gesturing towards the two fairies floating by the tent, the chief fluttered towards Anik again. Let's go get you that boat, old friend. Oh, I almost forgot. The chief fluttered away again from Anik's side and curiously arrived by Suda's left. Here, the little green-haired fairy was humming to itself, seemingly lost in its own world, whilst it was busy playing with one strand of Suda's lengthy-sized braided lock. Unbeknownst to the little one, the chief floated undetected right beside it. His two arms remained behind his back before vocally clearing his throat loud enough to catch the little fairy's attention. The green-haired fairy absently turned its head around. But the moment it locked eyes with the squinting-eyed bearded fairy, a look of sheer horror flashed across its round face. It looked truly horrified, as though it had just been caught stealing. And I could have sworn all members of the scouting team were delegated special chores. Perhaps I'm the mistaken one. Yes, it must be. It must be. Suda watched the little green-haired fellow twiddling its tiny hands, whilst it innocently looked down. Why, yes, Chief. I'll be on my way now. Goodbye, mister. The little green-haired fairy swiftly fluttered away without a second's thought. Suta could only wryly smile in response, watching the little guy begrudgingly flying away, but also slightly impressed by how obedient these intriguing, whimsical fellows were. They're like a bunch of little rascals, aren't they? Now then, shall we fetch that boat of yours? Fu. New friend, you will wait here whilst we handle those matters, said the chief before turning his face towards the fairy wearing the large dress. I'll be leaving our guest in your hands, Lady Ruora, he added, cupping his two little hands. The fairy, standing elegantly with folded silk pink hair, responded with a curtsy. She raised her emotionless gaze and said, I'll be honored. Before bowing gently, sensing Suta's lingering gaze, she swiftly placed her solemn glare towards him, startling him slightly into flinching and staring off into the empty air instead. Suta couldn't shake away this feeling of uneasiness surrounding these two. On one hand, the fairy dressed in purple robes wouldn't stop smirking at him, and on the other, the fairy adorned in a floral dress with pink hair wouldn't stop scrutinizing him. He recalled Anik's warnings just before they arrived here. Do not get roped into fairy business, he said, but Suta already understood some things were truly beyond his control these days. Unfortunately for Suta, he found himself inside the gazebo tent, seated on some very small but soft pillows. He folded his legs into the lotus position, gazing at a bizarre cut of thick, polished stone laid in front of him, giving him the feeling that this was perhaps the fairy business Anik had warned him about. The air was filled with the smoky scent of burning incense wafting through his nostrils, and the partially dimmed light being cast by the flickering lamps hung across the sides of the tent. Despite the rather spacious look of it from the outside, Suta felt like a giant inside of a miniature house. Casting his eyes across the thick slab of rectangular polished stone placed in the middle of the gazebo's floor, strangely it reminded him of one of those 5 pillars he vaguely remembered seeing in that eerie crypt, the same kind where he was tested to see which of the 5 languages of power he could understand. However, this one looked different. It was covered in deep indentations, as though hundreds of tiny claws had been carved into its surface. Fluttering her wings on the other side of the stone was the fairy dressed in dark purple robes. She maintained that eerily warm smile whilst her gray and partially green eyes filled with a sense of foreboding curiosity. Finally, after a tense and wordless interaction of stares, her lips parted, and a nasal voice tinged with an air of wisdom graced Suta's ears. You are a human? Hmin, and a traveler as well. Mhumi. Suta pointed at himself, slightly confused. Her warm smile creased a little deeper. She nodded her little head in response. A soul who has crossed the veil between worlds. One like yourself hasn't appeared on these shores in over 100 years. She spoke these things softly. Hearing her words, a look of deep surprise flashed across Suta's gaze. She knows I have come from another world? This means my earlier assumptions were true. I'm not the first one who has crossed over. Are there more humans? And if so, how do I find them? That look tells me you aren't surprised I'm aware of your kind. Good then, that makes this next bit a little easier. Oh, pardon my rudeness. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. I am Lady Melvide, and this is our fair maiden Lady Ruora, the last descendant of the true-blooded dynasty of our people. The House of Snow ruled by our first mother, the goddess Ilias. Suta casually beheld the fairy floating just beside him, noticing that, compared to the others, she seemed distrusting towards him peculiarly. Also, there was this strange sense that she was purposely keeping a distance between them both. Not that I'm too fussed about that kind of stuff, but I wonder what's the difference between her and the other fairly trusting fairies. Maybe it's the fact she's related to this so-called goddess. Wait, did she just say G-goddess? Suda's gaze suddenly filled with life, his attention returning to the reality staring him in the face. I take it you haven't heard of the creation myth? Some call it a myth, but others who know understand the undertones of truth hidden beneath the veil of this telling story. They say in the beginning, the divine made the worlds by mistake, but favored a single one amongst them, a world secluded away from the rest of the worlds. This world would be so highly favored that all the others would exist for the sake of keeping this one intact, devoid of the outside influences. The divine's true grace shall only exist amongst the populace of this strange and green world. I'm sure you're wondering, but why? Why would the divine, in all its infinite wisdom, allow only this one place to sit as the cornerstone of its benevolent grace? I couldn't tell you the reason, but one might speculate the worlds created by mistake were never deemed worthy of his grace. And some say with that, they were always fated to destroy themselves in the end. Suda studied her words intently, and although he was trying not to make any assumptions, he was gradually being drawn towards the truth that this special world was isolated by this divine earth. He muttered beneath his breath. There was only one place that fitted that description, and also, what the fishbowl head had explained to him about the fabric of his own world compared to the others struck out to him all of a sudden. Yeah, it must be Earth, he deduced within himself. In the end, that never came to pass. For much to the surprise of those spectating the cosmos, the worlds considered unfilial had proven themselves to be worlds much more accustomed to behaving in a manner fit for those underneath the grace of gods. For to prove themselves worthy, each world was granted a goddess to serve as a staple of the true way. There were 10 of such divine guardians: the goddess of the Fae, the goddess of the merfolk, the goddess of the mortal kin, the goddess of the immortals, the goddess of the divine ghosts, the goddess of the giant folk, the goddess of the trolls, the goddess of the elven folk, the goddess of the beast folk, and finally, the goddess of the Draconia. So many, but that makes somewhat sense, considering I'm sure I've met 2 of those goddesses so far. Suda thought to himself. He had been holding on to that kind of thought for quite some time now. After seeing that goddess in the cathedral, he had initially speculated that she couldn't have been the same one he met back in his old world, the one who took Ringo away. But now that he was aware of that speculation being an actual truth, he couldn't help but wear a sullen frown. How do I first differentiate between the goddesses, and then, how do I go about finding them? The more mysteries Suda found himself unraveling, the deeper into a pit he felt he was falling into. Those cold embers filled with weight anxiety found themselves igniting feelings he was desperately trying to avoid dealing with right now. Our people have been waiting for an age for the second coming of the traveler, the one said to hold both ends of fate in both of his hands. And whether or not you take these beliefs to matter to you, human, one cannot run away from the threads fate has woven for us. Suda observed the speaking fairy with a difficult gaze. Firstly, he was growing tired of dealing with these riddles and partially explained truths. Why couldn't anyone simply give him a straight explanation for once? Secondly, it was only a matter of time before someone began drawing me into their so-called prophecy. Whatever it is, I have no care for it. I just need strength. Besides that, who cares what the fates want for me? He clenched his fist subtly beside himself, a surge of defiance coursing through his veins. Lady Melvide's eyes narrowed, as if sensing the rebellion stirring within Suda's heart. You may wish to deny your destiny, young traveler, but the wheels of fate are already in motion. The path before you is set, and it is up to you to walk it with courage and conviction. Suda met her gaze, his own eyes burning with a fierce determination. My fate is my own, Lady Melvide. I will not be a pawn in some cosmic game, prophecy or no prophecy. The fairy smiled, with a hint of admiration flickering across her subtly aged features. And that, dear human, is precisely why you are the one the fates have chosen. Your will is strong. Your heart beats true, just like our leaders of old who once stood at the forefront of the wars against the beasts of hell that once roamed these lands. But remember this, human, even the mightiest of heroes cannot escape the threads that bind them to their destiny. She gestured to the polished stone once more. Suda gazed at the dark claw-like indentations that had now seemed to begin pulsing with a strange azure energy. This stone holds the key to perhaps unlocking your true potential. It was given to the first king of fairies. gifted to him by the goddess of my people. It serves as a guide to steer you along the path that fate has laid before you. But the choice to embrace that path, that is yours and yours alone.